It's Guard versus FaZe. I think this is going to be like their ultimate test. And if they beat FaZe, Guard are winning champions.
Whoever wins the upper bracket, like final, the upper final is going to be the one who makes it to LCQ. And my reasoning for that is,
what is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Valoranting, where we actually have returning guests for today. First off, Tanner Metro came in like, what, 2 weeks ago? I was like, I really like Tanner Metro. We got to have more Tanner Metro in here. So, Tanner, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to be back. And we have a lot to talk about.
For sure. And of course, we have Geo. Geo, you've been around the block for Rainbow Six and also in Overwatch. You've come on Valorant before, and now you're back again to talk about Valorant, of course. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. It's very hot, so if I'm sweating, that's why, but there you go.
Yeah, we're all going to be sweating because we got some hot topics to talk about, and let's get right into it. And before we actually get into the first topic, of course, the third week in a row where we actually have some great support from Twitch. So a big thanks to Twitch to help us make the show possible. And you know what? This is actually the first time that we're live with a sponsorship from Twitch, and we actually didn't crash from the get-go. So knock on wood, things have been going well. Let's get into the first topic right now. And we're going to start off hot, as we just mentioned before. We're going to talk about Sentinels, of course. We got to get the clout. We got to talk about Shroud. So Shroud, we've already seen him play towards the LCQ for the last weekend for 2 matches so far. And my question to start things off with you, Tanner, is Shroud the savior for Sentinels, the savior for NA, or is it just a marketing scheme?
You know, I think it could be both. I honestly think it could be both. In the first matchup with the Guard, I didn't really know what to expect. You know, the Guard looked kind of shaky, so I didn't know after seeing this one what type of Sentinels and Shroud we were seeing, right? If it's 2 watered down teams and the matches are super close, what does that mean? But what I did think in this first matchup was that Shroud looked kind of like the little brother trying to hang out with all the big brothers. Rightfully so, because he's been out the game. But I think Shroud ultimately is scaling, is what I think is happening.
Yeah. And for you, Gio, I mean, Shroud is a person that comes from Counter-Strike. I know you maybe you haven't been involved in Counter-Strike too much, but it's been a name that's really prominent within the scene for the attack FPS or just Twitch in general. So when you hear about this person, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Honestly, I mostly know him as a Twitch streamer, but someone who I've actually never watched because I don't really watch Twitch streamers. So I was like, when everyone lost their mind over the fact that Shroud was joining Sentinels, I was kind of there like, oh, that's one of those like people, right? I think the thing is if you take away the name Shroud and it's just a player who has professional experience joining a team, then like what you're looking at with these statistics and everything aren't really mind blowing. You know, it's like what Tanner just said about him looking like the little brother trying to play with the big brothers. That's not that crazy. He's just come in and this is his first kind of professional experience in Valorant with a proper team in like a high level official. It's actually not, you know, just because his name is Shroud and he's famous and he has a check mark doesn't really change much about that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. But at the same time, like we saw the results from that first game to the second game versus Shopify Rebellion, where it actually did look like the Shroud from like the 2015 Counter-Strike in Cloud9 that he was known for. And naturally, lots of eyes were on Shroud, were on Sentinels, and naturally, a lot of comments came out of the first series when it was Shroud technically supposed to be the one that was the only one planning for the team on Icebox. But I think Shazam has better things to say about this player, about Shroud. So let's listen in and see what he has to say.
And then Shroud is one of the most disciplined players, honestly, like that we've had on this team. He plays the controller role very well. He has incredible comms, and like when rounds break down, he's not scared to take over and start mid-rounding. So it's good.
That's it. That's experience coming in from Shroud too. And actually for me has been one of the biggest surprises for LCQ in North America, not only from his skill, but like his interviews post matches with Bach, for example, on the VCT desk was actually quite amazing because he looks well-spoken. He's comfortable in front of the camera. And that's not what Shroud used to be when he was a competitive player in Cloud9 before. So it's really nice. A really good breath of fresh air that we actually have in the scene so far. And we see this little snippet about Shroud of why and how he joined Sentinels. And you know what? It seems as at most that he was like just throwing out the window. Oh, you know, it looks like they needed a 5th. I just applied. And it just looked like I was able to join the team. And it almost brings back to that storyline with Raucus, for example, Tanner, where when we asked a question to like Zoms and the rest of Sentinels, like, hey, how come Ruckus joined Sentinels after he got dropped by FaZe? And then naturally, somehow it's just like, oh, I had a conversation with Zoms,
Right.
and then boom, I'm part of the team, and I'm signed like 2 weeks later for Champions.
Yeah, I wonder if it's one of those things too, because I think there was a lot of pride in Sentinels and probably Shazam specifically for kind of just being the guy. All last year, Shazam was kind of like extra man and extra brain, extra everything, and was getting a lot of love for it. So I'm wondering if at some point there was kind of a step back from the pride and from, I guess, the love that he was getting from that. And, you know, in having these conversations, just in passing, if that was enough to be like, you know what, maybe we do try and find an analyst, a coach, or something like that. Maybe we do start to kind of outsource for the most part. I do want to highlight though that in the second series for Shroud, 38% headshot percentage. That right there is like, again, I think Shroud is only going to be scaling. Their next matchup against 100 Thieves is obviously going to be probably, if not the largest test we see from them. I don't know, but it's good for the scene. I think
that's the
ultimately it's good
but.
for the
That's
scene.
the but. The good for the scene. Shroud is good,
Yeah.
but this, but that. Is he the savior of the Sentinels or not, Tanner? Are they going deep in the LCQ? Are they going to Champions?
Okay, you know what? Listen, I think he's in a little too deep. I think the water is a little too warm. Although he had a good performance against Shopify, they are the dark horse. You're supposed to have a good performance against Shopify. So unfortunately, I think they are hitting a wall against 100 Thieves.
All right. Well, at least we heard it here from Tanner. We're putting Shroud and Sentinels on the spot. And speaking about hot topics,
man, don't do me like that, man. You'll just out me. We gotta just go past it.
Tanner, welcome back to Valoranting. But anything else that actually makes it hot water? You talked about hot water maybe in the position right now for Sentinels with Shroud. There's another agent that actually makes the water hot. That's with Hot Hands. That's Phoenix. So Phoenix was actually played over the past weekend during the LCQ. Most recently, I think it was today or yesterday with Liquid, and also, of course, from Boostio over at EG. So I want to know your thoughts, Gio, as we talk about the Phoenix. So there's been some changes that's been going on within the last patch. The updates is actually being used for Phoenix on this in this LCQ. Do you think the changes for Phoenix are good enough for Phoenix higher pick rate?
Well, I think we can kind of look at the evidence here and say clearly yes to some extent. Otherwise, he wouldn't be being used. And one thing that I've become a really big proponent of, basically since the kind of, I suppose the beginning of the year when we started to see trends come in one team playing an agent a certain way. The one I always cite is Cloud9 playing KO, the way that they did at Champions, and then OpTic with the way that they play Neon. It always kinds of sets trends, and you seem to notice now that teams that are willing to try new ways of playing agents and willing to actually innovate and not necessarily stick to what has been the meta for some time are usually the ones to actually see some success. So I'm actually quite fond of the fact that there are teams who have looked at these changes in Phoenix and they've said, okay, well, we're actually going to try and use this now, come up with something new that our opponents are maybe not necessarily expecting. And even if it isn't perfect straight away, and let's say a month down the line, there is a kind of new accepted meta way of playing Phoenix, this might not be that, but it is the beginnings of that. And I think usually innovation, when there are positive changes to some agent, is quite a good sign for teams.
Yeah, even when you're looking at this matchup on Ascent, so that's the map that Phoenix was picked out. Was picked for this map, is that we've seen this before in the past, Tanner, where Phoenix was actually very prominent on this map. I'm thinking of players like Mata. I'm thinking of players like Asuna. Of course, Drone, when it was still playing TSM on this map, it was just like, hey, let's play some heavy A mains, some heavy B mains with the curveballs. But this time we were able to add a little bit more with combinations from the Fade. But do you think, Tanner, in your eyes, this has become like a one-trick kind of thing where you might expect it now that Phoenix is going to be on this map? Or can he bring something different on a map like Ascent, where you could go deeper than just having to play aggressive extremities on defense?
Yeah, so I'm also going to throw Sick into that, the kind of the pile of names there, because Sick also played the Phoenix on Ascent a lot. To answer your question, for the rest of LCQ, I don't know how much Phoenix. I think we actually probably don't see any more Phoenix for the most part. But fortunately, Evil Geniuses have a lot of time to try and figure out whether or not the Phoenix is going to work, because they've been toasted. I think that the Phoenix is not necessarily a great pick right now, especially bringing in an LCQ. I think that's super scary. You don't have a whole lot of time to do it. But what I do think is happening is we're starting to see more agents be implemented into the game, like the Fade, and that alone is kind of like a shoulder to shoulder buff to the agents like Phoenix. I think Mimi was tweeting about the instead of throwing the C's nade, now you can seize hot hands, and you can do stuff like that where you're having that Phoenix run it back right behind the Prowler, or the Phoenix run it back working as utility that is going to not only draw attention into A main, but now that Haunt is going up and nobody's paying attention to that bit. So I'm not sold on the Phoenix, but I do think that we are starting to see as more agents get, involved in Valorant or more are released, we can see some of these agents that have, fallen by the wayside slowly start to come back in.
Yeah, and the good thing too with Phoenix is kind of like when you have one of those duelists that are able to that's able to find information, right? Just like Race, for example, with the boom bot is going to help you find information, and because the run it back is only 6 ult orbs, and you're also able to get your armor back when you're popped from the run it back, it's still a good way to scout. So with those in mind, do you want to see more Phoenix going into the later matches for LCQ or just in the meta of Valorant? If you want to start theory crafting here, Gia.
I don't know if I necessarily want to see more Phoenix, but I wouldn't be against it, if that makes sense. I'm not like specifically rooting for there to be more of him. I think that kind of the point that Tanner was making, where especially you can combine him with the Fade and use that really for a lot of fact finding. I think that if you can lean into this idea of sort of duoing him up with some kind of support, then maybe you can get a lot more complex ideas actually done with him. Because I think when you think back to Phoenix, how he used to be played, he was really one of these like solo duelists who could kind of go and look after himself. That's the point of him having the ability to heal himself, the way that his curveballs worked, you can kind of flash for yourself. Whereas now actually combining that with more of a big part of an engagement where you're actually using it alongside others, then yeah, I think maybe you can have some safer and less risky ways of playing Phoenix that actually bring about a larger return on investment in what it is you use. But I don't think that necessarily means that he is going to be like a bona fide replacement for other duelists, for example, a Jet or whatever in your engagements.
Yeah, and you know what? At least when you had the Phoenix come out on Ascent, we were engaged watching these games, right? Because, oh shit, Phoenix is making a comeback. There's updates in here or not, but here's another topic that allows you, or that talks about the engagement, is actually, again, about Sentinels, where they almost broke record viewership once again. At least they did for North America. It's probably like one of the most viewed matches outside of the Masters, as you could see here from the screenshot. Over 600,000 people have tuned in to the Sentinels versus the Guard game, the debut of Shroud basically into this roster. And when you're looking at Masters 2 Copenhagen that just happened, that's just over this graphic, it shows that it's the numbers coming in from the grand finals of FPX versus PRX at Masters Copenhagen on LAN with a crowd, first international event, while you have an online game that almost matches up to that. So Tanner, my question to you is, are we going to start, are we scared of the viewership and the engagement of the community in Valorant competitive so far?
No, I think it's great, right? I think Valorant is supposed to be the next big esport, and it might take a little bump from somebody who's got a lot of clout behind him to do it. Also, mind you, I'm pretty sure that was on a Thursday, right? That we got that matchup. So who knows? Maybe if it was a Saturday, I'm not going to get into it. But no, I think it's great. I think, like I said, Valorant's supposed to be the next big thing, and it's kind of starting to get there. And I think with that, too, what do we just saw Stewie kind of walking away from and wanting to be a content creator. That itch is always going to come back. We're seeing it with Shroud, and I think more big names are going to want to get into the biggest esport that is going to be out there. So I think the numbers, it's a draw for everybody, for fans, for organizations, for players who might be elsewhere to move on over to Valorant.
Yeah, and it seems that we're switching over to like almost like a meta viewership. And Gio, it seems like you were going to say something here, so I'm going to just let you take the bite.
I was just going to say, I think that a non-Masters game reaching Masters level viewership is not concerning just because the viewerships of the two things become the same. I'd be concerned if the Masters level games were getting terrible viewership, but they're not. It's the other way around. So we should be celebrating the fact that this non-Masters game did awesomely and not worrying about the fact that it was like, oh, it's catching up to Masters. Who cares? Who cares? That's a good thing. Bring in the viewers. That's awesome.
Do you guys actually? Well, we'll talk about it another time. But I feel like what happens if Shroud actually didn't play for that Sentinels game, but it was still a Sentinels matchup
Well, like
versus
3
the
people
Guard
would
as
have
the
watched.
first game, right? Yeah, the numbers maybe wouldn't be as high, but at least like even watch parties like Tarek had like 150,000 viewers just themselves. So that's pretty cool to see how that's moving forward. So big shout out to Tarek to be one of the main watch parties for the VCTs. And this allows me to give another shout out here over to Juke.gg, who's another sponsor of our event or our show for today. Of course, we've been shouting out for the past few weeks, but this time they have something new hot off the press on the table for you all to enjoy. And make sure you download the application on your Android or your Apple phone, because they actually now are trying out a beta version of a live chat experience so that everybody could hop in as a group and talk about the VCTs. You could connect with like-minded fans to talk about the meta, talk about the games, and discuss everything without the whole chaos of like all the emotes. And the lol caster said brim stammy instead of a brim stimmy in Twitch chat, and you could actually have regular and adult conversations about the players and about these teams. And they're actually really open-minded. Of course, it's Shoot.gg that runs an application and a website and a platform for the community. So they want you to try it out throughout the rest of the VCTs, whether it's North America, South America, or even Europe or around the world, so that if you have any feedback to give to them, they'll make sure that they do the updates and make sure you have a continuous good experience with the chat program that they currently are testing out here for Juke.gg. So big thank you to Juke. Moving on now, we actually are going to move to roster updates. The most recent roster update is not only on players only, but for organizations. So as you see this tweet longer from Nats, it's an official statement talking about Masters 3 champions that are now officially free agents. And they went through roster changes, dropping Defo and picking up JD and Purpo, and are currently looking for a team to represent them. And they're currently playing in the LCQ in EMEA, still battling it through, still alive. So your thoughts here, Gio, on any of these topics. So who do you think is going to be the organization that could pick up M3C?
Well, so here's my fear about this is if you imagine an organization that's not already in Valorant and they want to pick up this team, it's already too late to apply for a partnership with Riot. And that's where my fear about it comes in, because that means that really M3C, who are a tier 1 team, they're a Masters champion, they're a very good team, in order to be in the running to actually end up in the, pseudo franchise league next year, a team who already owns a team and is already applying for the partnership would have to drop their entire team if they're going to do that. And it makes me wonder if this team is going to end up getting picked apart as orgs decide to pick individual players to go to their teams, because that's actually the only way that they can sort of keep their current rosters and take some of these players who are really valuable. It makes me wonder if it's just going to end up being kind of the end of the era for Mech, because I really don't, unless they go into tier 2, I really, really don't know what the options outside of that are.
Yeah, because there's probably like VRLs and there's probably like the tier 3 orgs are going up as well. So Tanner, you got something to add on to this topic as well?
I think to that point though, I'm not too sure what it's looking like for the definitely not franchising on the EMEA side of things, but I know that for North America, we have teams like the TSMs that are still in talks and still in questions. And I mean, quite frankly, TSM has been a stinker org for quite some time in Valorant. Yeah, they have been asked. So again, now to take that correlation and go over to EMEA, I think there's a world where maybe one of these teams that does make it into the partnership program then kind of just drops all of their players and looks to pick up something else, because that's what TSM's going to have to do if they want to compete against the XSETs, the OpTics, those roster changes will have to be made.
I don't even know if they are applying for the partnership program, but I suppose you could look at teams like, or orgs like XL who have an LEC slot. Like that would probably be where I would think, because XL do have a team in the VRLs. And as I say, I don't know if they're applying for partnership. I don't know if they would want to drop their roster. They're a British organization. Like, are they going to want to pick up all of these CIS players? I don't really know how that would work. But I think my mind would maybe go to organizations who own an LEC slot, like are going to probably be the most likely to have their interest piqued by buying or trying to get a Valorant slot, even if they don't have a top team right now, I guess.
And since you were able to actually cover a little bit of M3C over last year at Masters Reykjavik and whatnot, what are your thoughts as well into changes in the roster from Purpo and JD joining the team? Are they going to be the difference maker that's going to help Mech qualify to champions here, Gio?
Vans, I wasn't actually at Masters Reykjavik. I was at
Yeah.
Masters Berlin.
Oh, sorry, what are the Masters?
I mean, I'll forgive you. I mean,
One that they won.
I think that yes, the one that they won. I think that Mecca may be one of these teams that I've kind of warmed to the idea of them making roster change in the same way that I was very vocal about this happening with Sentinels for quite some time. I think that when a team starts to have some stale performances, and I want to be very careful how I put this because Mech have not performed badly, but they have not performed well enough. But they have had a roster which has been together for a long time, and they have basically reached the very top with that roster, and then that roster as a unit has stopped being good enough. I'm usually a proponent of there being some kind of roster change at some point in that. Now, the nice thing about JD is obviously JD is, come from Ninjas in Pajamas and NIP and Na'Vi. So also been playing in a CIS team. So it's not like they've had to reach really far to some. I know that CIS players usually like to stay amongst themselves. I don't really know much about Purpo, to be honest with you, but I think that just having that change, moving Defo on, and having just some change in the kind of environment and in that dynamic could be a really big, point for them.
Yeah. And Tanner, do you think this is going to be the make it or break it? Because you're going to be the one that I'm going to be like just asking every single time, are they qualifying or not? And you tell me a big yes or no.
I say no. I say if you're going to bring in a brand new player, you can't expect anything because you have to not only work this person into your roster and just make it kind of fit, but also I think we just saw JD's first ever, I want to say Fade and Sky for Mech and in officials. It just, if you have a new player, try and put them on something they're a bit more comfortable on, not something that they're not, to have a kind of terrible performance. So, no, unfortunately, I think JD needs more time.
Yeah, and JD for me was a person that actually was playing a lot of Sage when I was first watching him play too, over in the Na'Vi days or whatnot. But you have to figure out some of the roles. It's kind of like the Shroud thing when you're playing your first matchup playing controller, you're not putting the frags in, but watch him just drop huge numbers against Oglu in the other semis for the upper bracket. But let's move over to the pond, over to North America. Over the past weekends, there was actually more Valorant happening outside of VCTs. We actually did have more towards the female scene. We had the Astral Clash organized by Gen G. This is actually a pretty cool 1/2D event where you had some of the biggest names in Game Changers in North America that qualified and that played, because you have to go through an online qualifier to play this. And to summarize it here, we have Evil Geniuses that actually won the event. And Evil Geniuses used to be Team Dignitas, just to give you a little bit of an update, on their roster changes, because Dignitas, unfortunately, has let go of a lot of teams and people within their staff most recently. But Evil Geniuses playing against Misfit, surprisingly enough, in the grand finals, and not a team like, for example, Shopify Rebellion, who fell in third. So, Tanner, you actually hung out at this event. You drove all the way from Phoenix to LA to hang out. So, what was that event like for you?
Yeah, so for me personally, the event was super cool. Meeting all the players. I've worked with the Game Changer scene since kind of the inception. Game Changers won back in 2021. So it was really nice to see, put a lot of, everybody's got an anime profile picture. So to put faces to names, but to also see these players actually get the chance to compete on LAN. I think this event alone in itself, as if, Game Changers with Riot Games wasn't enough, it legitimizes this in orgs wanting to put money into this and get the teams out there. And again, just the legitimacy of the whole entire tournament to bring 8 teams out to a LAN. It stinks that it was only one day. It stinks because the venue was very hot and people were sweaty. And it stinks that the only food was Mr. Beast Burger. But other than that, I think with a bit more planning going into the next one, I think it'll be just as electric. The atmosphere was really cool. And then again, on a personal level, I had a blast with the players, the coaches. I got to meet Sapphire, who, is observing all of the events that matter, in the VCTs and stuff. So making those connections, I think for the players also meant a lot.
Yeah. I think that's pretty cool too, where even in North America, the tier 2 scene was like looking at NSG lands, for example, but it didn't have like the huge crowd of people hanging out and stuff like that too. So it was nice to see for Astral Clash, and I'm hoping to see more of that in terms of LANs and tournaments in North America for the supporting the tier 2, tier 3 scene, or any other divisions looking at Valorant. And now let's go back into Europe, where we actually have some most recent announcements with Team Liquid, and who are still also within the EMEA with the LCQ. So unfortunately here, it's now official that Team Liquid has parted ways with Sliggy. Sliggy originally has left the team alongside Link because they had differences in views and the direction of where we wanted to go with Team Liquid so far. So most recently, they picked up Emil as a coach. It's not Doom Bros, by the way, chat. It is his twin brother, formerly the head coach of Guild X. And Guild X actually most recently has been pretty much at the top of the chain for game changers over in Europe, always getting like second and third place behind G2 Gozin. So let's start off with that conversation. Emil as a coach, what does he bring that's different than Sliggy and Liquid? How do they look so far? And I'll push that question over to you here, Gio.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know Emil from Overwatch. Emil was a flex tank player back in mostly played in Overwatch Contenders. I think he was on Angry Titans, but you know, this is memory of a few years, like trying to remember. And so that's mostly what I can base my opinion of him on. And I think the interesting thing about the role that he played in Overwatch is it is a role that requires you to have quite a holistic view of what is going on. And Overwatch is obviously a very chaotic game because being a flex tank, you're going to be playing frontline and backline at a moment's notice. And so I think that kind of sets you up pretty well to be having a like a really good kind of coaching mind. Clearly, there is, you know, given the reasons for Sliggy leaving the organization and this difference in opinion, whatever that difference in opinion is must be something that Emil actually fits a lot more in with the organization. So it makes me wonder if we're just going to be seeing quite a, I don't want to say profound change in the way that the team plays, but there has to be some fundamental way that things are going to change. And that's something I'm very curious of as somebody who has been incredibly critical of Team Liquid over time. I mean, I'm actually quite a big fan of Sliggy. I think he's a really intelligent coach. But I think that Team Liquid have been a strange team where they've had like a lot of people who have overlapping roles and they are trying to take on the roles that you have to play in the game. Whereas if you maybe took them all as individuals, you'd maybe put them all on the same role, if that makes sense. And so I think I'm mostly curious to see how the jobs and the roles within the team are going to be divvied out and those responsibilities. And I think that's going to be the most important thing that that Emil's going to have to really nail with them, because I just think that's tripped Team Liquid up like kind of time and time again.
I agree with you. The mix up of roles, but also the mix up of who the hell is IGLing for this team. Going from like not having one to then Yampi, and now officially it's back on Scream. And then most critically, we're saying, oh well, if Scream's gonna be fragging, well maybe he's not gonna be able to, or sorry, IGLing, he's not gonna be able to frag as much. So they have to bring in a new fifth player. And I thought the fifth player was gonna be an IGL, but they actually bring in Dimasic. So Dimasic most recently has played for FPX and also known as a short stint with NIP. Has this actually been the winning solution and the winning missing piece actually for Team Liquid to have a strong run so far in the LCQ to try to qualify for Champion Center?
Yeah, you know, I think it just goes back to the same old, same old. We're getting the highlight here of Dimasic being able to play the Sage, an agent that they are very comfortable on, and that is cool. I love that. If you can bring somebody who obviously has competitive experience, right, isn't transferring games like we've seen, isn't the Shroud where you kind of have to put them on controller, you put them on, you slot them into a role where they would normally play. But I think also in this series, they had Dimasic on the Omen, and it's like first time Omen and officials, and it just looks awkward. It really seems like the teams, Team Liquid here in this one specifically, are kind of scrambling to just find a player, put them in, say, hey, you're good. And then at that point, you kind of just have to hope for the best. So it's just one of those things. I think, again, they need time, but I would love to see teams look a little bit more directly at, can we get a 1-for-1? So at the very least, they're comfortable on their agents and they're not working on both agent and fitting in with the team.
Yeah.
I do wonder, you know, especially with some of the things that we saw at Masters and also with the chamber nerfs upcoming, if Cypher is going to make his way back in the meta, maybe that's something that Dimasic's going to become really useful for. Because that's basically all he played on FPX. Yes, he played Sage, but for a long time, he was just the Cypher guy. And I do wonder if that's something that he would be able to kind of come in and be like, haha, my time is now, you know? Like with, I guess it depends on how the meta is really going to change, but I think we've seen hints that Cypher is probably going to come back to some extent.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great point too, because if we do have the chamber nerfs and then Yampi, for example, is not going to play chamber, then MSX could definitely do that. And maybe they're just thinking that far ahead. I mean, there's a lot of players and a lot of people in the community that think that Team Liquid are going to make it to the grand finals at least. And Sliggy is actually one of them. So still, you know, no bad blood between Sliggy and Team Liquid. Still a great, strong supporter of the team and that roster. So where I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I mean, they just beat BBL. They're continuing into the upper bracket. So we'll keep an eye out within the VCTs. And speaking of VCTs for the last dance qualifier, we're going to do like just a skip through or a skim through every single region so far, because as you know, there's only 24 hours in a day, and I can only watch so many hours of Valorant within a day while still trying to stay sane. So to summarize real quick into the LCQ and APAC, Boom Esports. So for the first time in Valorant history, we're going to have an Indonesia team going into champions. And that's actually quite fucking awesome to see, because you had favorites, for example, like Team Secret or like Bleed Esports that were supposed to qualify at least to the grand finals. And it was most likely going to be one of those two teams that was going to qualify for champions. But you had an all Indonesian grand finals between OpTic G and also Boom Esports. And the heartbreaking part of it, too, is OpTic G losing in the grand finals. One of the players actually had to skip through like offers from PRX and offers from, I think, even Team Secret when they qualified for LAN before. So that kind of sucks to see. And it's heartbreaking. But Tanner, I think you kept a close eye on South America so far.
Yes, so South America, I have the honor of working and casting alongside the #1 South America stand-in Dryad, so she kind of hooked me up here for this one. And this bracket that we have here, it isn't quite flushed out. You would see Furia moving on and Crew moving on as they took down Nines and Keith Stars respectively. That, I think, is one of the most anticipated matchups. Furia, I believe, just had some changes with their roster. And then Crew are facing this crazy kind of community pressure as a team. And I think they said it themselves that they are feeling that pressure a little bit. So although they looked good against the Keed Stars, they beat them 2-0, kind of close matchups. I think they have their largest, I guess, feat ahead of them in this Furia squad that looks like the #1.
And I think, you know, maybe last but not least, East Asia, and which has been a region that has been fascinating a lot of people. Once again, this bracket is not fully fleshed out, so if you want to look at that match 08, I think that is, the other upper bracket match, that would be Crazy Raccoon versus Northeption, and then down in your last lower round matchup, that's going to be Damwon versus Cone. And I think the really interesting thing here is none of the full Korean teams are in the upper bracket anymore. Actually, we have a lot of these mixed teams. And so interestingly, we have full Chinese teams, which means that if we have someone like Edward Gaming, who, I mean, if you're a League of Legends fan, you're going to be very familiar with that organization as it is. But a team like Edward Gaming, if they get all the way to the grand finals in an upper bracket run, we could see our very first Chinese team making it to champions, which I think in and of itself would be so fascinating, because we as a community have learned to really love like the Southeast Asian you know, region, and like the Latin American region, and these regions that were previously understated, and this would be a new region that we actually don't know a ton about.
Yeah, that's I actually have to put it out there as well, though, that I actually stayed up to watch that hype of EDG versus Onslayers, and I thought it was going to be a fucking amazing match. It was a fucking waste of time. So don't stay up to watch East Asian qualifiers until you actually get later into the brackets, chat. That said, let's summarize what's going on as well for EMEA. We talked a little bit about Liquid that made it forward, as well as Mech Of course, the bracket is not updated yet because it's live right now. So Team Liquid and also Na'Vi have won their matches into that quarterfinals upper, and G2 just beat Ascent in the lower bracket round number 1. So unfortunately, the first team eliminated is Ascent, who recently just picked up Blink. And on the other end, the other lower bracket matchup is currently 1-0 in the series between Guild Esports and BBL. So pretty crazy that other favorites such as BBL and Guild Esports are meeting up face-to-face into the lower bracket round number 1 for the lower bracket run to try to qualify for Masters. So make sure you just keep one window open on twitch.tv/Valorant, because that's all of the matches. It's basically happening around the clock. You got all of the regions happening. When one is done, the other one starts. So you're not going to miss on anything. But after looking at or summarizing all of these brackets, was there any of these matches here that surprised you, Tanner, looking at the results at least?
So I was looking again directly at the South Americas, and I think that matchup that I talked about, Furia versus Crew, just because of obviously Crew being a worldwide favorite now at this point from what they've been able to do in the international tournaments. I think that's one of the matchups that you need to be watching. And if you're a super fan of the Latin Americas, Valorant_LA for Latin America, there's matches going on right now, and it's kind of the widely understood number 2 for these regions in the LCQ and Fusion. They're playing in the lower bracket, and they've got a player out because they're sick and their coach is filling in. Yeah, South America, I think a lot of people should be keeping their eyes on that just to see if, Vamos Crew makes it through again.
Yeah, and if Crew will continue to have like the wins over the Brazilian team. Sorry, Gio, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think for me, it has to be looking over in the North American LCQ, and this is a happy surprise, but it's seeing the Guard do as well as they're doing, because I think after stage 2, where things looked like they were crumbling a little, you kind of wondered, okay, did they just have their really good like inception into the scene, and then they've just been humbled a bit? And actually, you can tell they've gone away, they've done whatever it is they need to do, and they're having a really good upper bracket run so far. I'm very interested to see if they are going to make it to the grand finals via the upper bracket when they get to their game versus FaZe. But I think that's just a really positive, kind of surprise that's come out of the LCQ in North America.
Yeah, I agree. Even for me, the Guard, it's like, always one of those comfort picks when I was watching and even casting that game. But we'll have a chance to dig a little bit deeper within the LCQ when we're going to have Andersin coming on as a guest for today's show, and we'll look at every single match and see what he has to say about the agent compositions coming out from the Guard or their performance as a whole. So let's take over with the news, the roster changes, and maybe even roster updates in terms of staff, because we do have OpTic Gaming and also FNATIC currently looking for analyst positions. And I found that this was actually quite interesting how they were looking for these analysts, because both of them actually just tweeted out on Twitter, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that, you need to have this, you need to have that, and good luck, have fun in your inboxes and your DMs when you're posting that Mini in chat. I'm pretty sure they got flooded with trolls and whatnot. I'm pretty sure Mini had some fun with that as well. In terms of like, here are some of the random emails that I've gotten. Maybe I shouldn't have put it out, but my question to you guys, starting off with you here, Gio, is why do you think these two teams, these two organizations are currently looking for analysts so late within the year when, they maybe could have picked them up during Masters 2, for example?
No, I think this is pretty simple. I think that both of these teams underperformed compared to their own expectations at Masters, and they've come back and they're like, well, shit. Because the problem is when you've got domestic stuff, which both of these teams have absolutely slayed at, you only need to be able to anti-strat a certain amount of stuff, and that's because a lot of people in your region are going to play very similarly. But it always comes to be at international is when it's really hard. And the amount of work that is going to be required of the support staff to be able to do that anti-stratting in pretty unforgiving periods of time for things like that, that's only going to get harder as the way you play gets more complex and teams get better. And I think both of these teams are like, right, if we allow ourselves to slip now, we are going to be overtaken and we will lose those glory days of being really good. We didn't get as far as we thought we would. We didn't get as far as we wanted to at Masters. We need to make sure we are picking up those pieces now and ensure that we have enough of a workforce behind us so that we are not missing anything. I don't think it's a case of like, they could have done it before Masters. They probably thought they had enough resources before Masters and their expectations were set accordingly, and those expectations were dashed. So they're fixing it.
And I want to jump on quickly, just to caveat, right? When we see the domestic stuff, it's usually week after week, and you have time to prep. We heard Doom Bros talk about the last time I was actually on the episode, say, damn, man, this is tough. You know, we just saw a team in PRX who was impossible almost to anti-strat, or felt like impossible to anti-strat because you only have one day to do so. So there's definitely just workload that needs to be spread out for the most part.
Yeah, so that's going to be very interesting. Good luck and have fun as well. You were talking about it, Gio, where they're looking for maybe ways to anti-strat outside the region, which is why one of the topics coming out there from Chet's interviews, questions actually, is why did we lose to a certain team like FPX on Split? How do we anti-strat loud on Ascent, right? So really fun. Looking forward to see who's going to come out of it from the analyst position. But now let's move on over to, a topic that's as old as time, that's going to resurface from time to time as well, from event to event, especially when there's 600,000 people that are watching the game. Then there's naturally going to be some eyes of like, okay, well, you got some for the community, but this time it's back from the players. So our buddy Mike Dapper is tweeting out, listening to casters criticize players on the way that they play is making my body cringe. So I'm paraphrasing on the way that they play, but it's on the decision making. And then we had a couple of replies going on for it as well, such as Steel replying, "Hey, I don't think Chamber should have picked that. Is this Chamber anchor?" And it's that's the point of Chamber. You're looking for these aggressive picks. I get the point of view from there. So Steel also memed out, give me some examples or whatnot. And then you have somebody going into Tarek's chat. I think I kind of know this guy, and I think a lot of people know him as well.
Yeah.
Underrated player, but most recently won a major and also got a lot of MVPs in a lot of his events that he played. But Simple saying, you need to explain these players in Valorant to stop fucking over peaking. They play so stupid right now. And literally, as he said that, I think somebody over peaked into the matchup as well when we were hanging out in Tarek's stream for the watch party. So that was pretty funny to see. But I want to know, like, what's your thoughts so far on commentators commentating about players' decision making, and do you think casters such as ourselves are going a little bit too far from time to time as how we're criticizing these players' plays?
Well, it's obviously a big topic, but the players aren't the target audience. And I think that it is something you have to consider with esports is there is this strange feedback loop where if players get too much negative press, they risk losing their jobs. And so obviously they may fear that the public broadcast that everyone is listening to may have an impact on that. Likewise, the same is for casters, right? It's like if players who typically have very loyal fan bases are going to constantly criticize casters, then the caster is going to get really afraid of losing their job, and then they'll want to appease the players. So we get this weird feedback loop where I think people don't actually necessarily get to do exactly what it is they want to do because they're worried about what the other side is thinking. But I think for the most part is like there is this weird connection that's been made that needs to be disconnected with this idea that the point of a broadcast is to paint everything with sunshine and roses, and that the players are the target audience. They're not. Players aren't the target audience. Not even people at really super high elo are necessarily the target audience. Like, it's not necessarily always about, like, explaining at a crazy high level what is happening. That's obviously a great thing to have on a broadcast, but the point, first and foremost, is entertainment. And that is why in so many examples of commentary, in all sorts of commentary across the ages, you have harsh criticism. Even if it is not entirely right, it's about driving emotion in the viewer. And that's it. Look, as a player, if you're like worried about how you're doing, or if you like care about what's being said about what, just worry about your thing. If you win, then you prove them wrong. That's
Exactly.
it. Just worry about your thing, and also the same kind of should be for casters to an extent. But I think that casters are probably a little bit more at risk of being attacked by loyal fan bases. But I just think that it gets so exhausting. Like, it's just sometimes a little bit like, all right, princess, like it's not actually really about you.
Well, even at that point too, I think you nail it on the head too. I think it's more about the community that pitchfork from whoever is their favorite follower, right? Because one thing that's good, at least for me as a caster, is that I'm actually not getting death threats. While players, when they lose their matches, they're getting death threats left and right from their fan base or even their fake fans. So that fucking sucks to see that in that aspect. But I think that right now, when you're looking at the state of just casters in general and how they criticize players, I don't think they're as harsh as some others may do, even in the professional scene. And we actually have a few examples for that, so let's have a look at them.
Coming off a worse week than Harvey Weinstein, and they're up by 14 points.
Only my LA guy comes up with that
Well,
one.
you know.
There you go.
It's dark days indeed, but this is a time for leaders to step up. And so to the supposed leaders, I will say this. All right, Tim Howard. Tim, the Belgium game ended 3 years ago. We need you to save the ball now. Jeff Cameron, clean it up or let's get someone who will. Clint Dempsey, yeah, you're a national team legend. Now we need you to be a national team leader. Michael Bradley, the U.S. does not need you to be zen. The U.S. needs you to play better. Josie Altidore, is this really as good as it gets? Because it's still not good enough. Bruce Arena. Bruce, Jurgen Klinsmann lost at home to Mexico. You lost at home to Costa Rica. This is now all on you, not Jurgen. Oh, and by the way, to all the guys that I didn't mention it because you don't even warrant to mention. That includes you too, Wonder Boy. So, what are you guys going to do? Are you going to continue to be a bunch of soft, underperforming, tattooed millionaires? You are a soccer generation that has been given everything. You are a soccer generation who is on the verge of squandering everything. So, now it's time to pay it back. Make us believe again.
And you think that we're edgy when we say he should have peaked? Come on. I thought that was fucking harsh as fuck. And even I was cringing fucking listening to that. I'd be like, oh, fuck, man. I even asked production when we were doing preparing for the show. I was like, did this guy get fired after? But yeah, I think that even the way that we're currently doing things, it's not that bad in my opinion. But Tanner, I want to know your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think Gio, said it perfectly. Gio kind of hit the nail on the head for essentially what is happening on the broadcast and to who it's directed towards. I just wanted to add in that we don't, as casters, want to be hated. Obviously, we don't say these things for people to come at us or for the likes or for this. And so when a situation like this arises, obviously, like, give us some context, right? How many games are happening throughout the weekend? If you're unhappy with something, you are probably more than welcome to go to any caster and say, you know, what the heck did you mean by this, man? Because we don't get to explain ourselves in the moment. So put yourself in their shoes if you could, or think about how else that could have meant, because we're not trying to come at you as players or fans. And then also, a lot of the times, the casters are just having a conversation, right? That's where good casting comes from, is when they're not necessarily casting to the players or to the chat, but they're doing it to one another. And stuff like that comes up in conversation, right? How many times have somebody in the chat or even a player and like, wow, that guy's shit. You know, that happens all the time. So take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. The casters aren't doing it to piss people off or to get under people's skin. And yeah, again, don't just like blindly toss out to your followers to get everybody to go at people's necks. Like, have a conversation, man. If you're upset with something, like, especially somebody like Dapper, like, you can go to literally anybody on any desk anywhere, dude, and have that conversation and say, hey, man, you shouldn't do it like that, because they might have meant it a completely different way. Whatever it might have been could obviously be misinterpreted 1,000 different ways. So
yeah,
I just think the whole situation was handled poorly. Obviously, casters, our job isn't to just shit talk people. It's not what we're trying to do, but we are having a conversation. We are talking to one another.
Entertain too, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Entertainment.
And Scott was also bringing a good point as well in the chat as well, saying that you know, it depends who is also making the comments, because the one that we just saw too, the person that was very harsh on those players was also an ex-pro player as well within the European football scene, but of course American soccer player in this case. But you know what? I think for me, my recommendation for any type of like new casters when they're coming in is also, you know, we always have the hindsight of being able to see everything when we're casting as well. So try to keep in mind, put yourself in the shoes of that player as to why they're making that decision. And then maybe it'll give you a better idea as to be like, oh, I maybe understand why they're making that play, instead of just trying to just shit talk within the moment. If you don't want to be that type of like edgy type of like caster that wants to just shit on everybody too, because you could have that personality as well, and I'm not against that. But if you want to not get the pitchforks being thrown at you, then maybe that's one of the tips you could look into So with that, at least that's going to end the rapid fire segment that we currently have for this show for Valoranting. We actually do have our interview segment coming up right after. It's going to be Andersin of Nearest Airport that's going to be joining us for the interview and also to talk about LCQ. So before we go to the break, of course, we want to give one final shout out to Twitch.tv. Without them, we actually can't get the show. Of course, we'll still be able to get the show because it's free for you to stream on Twitch.tv, and it's easy to do. All you got to do is turn on the stream, turn on your camera, and you're good to go. But at least this time, we got some moolah given by Twitch. So thank you, Twitch. We'll go for a break, and when we come back, we'll have a conversation with Andersin.
If you're enjoying Valoranting, feel free to follow us on our other socials. We're over at Twitter at Valoranting, and of course, every Tuesday, 11 a.m. PT, we're live on twitch.tv/DNP.
Welcome back, everybody, to Valoranting, the show where we talk about Valorant and just shit talk to each other all the time as well, here and there. It's now time to get into our interview portions for today. We actually do have Andy Collins, who's going to be joining with us, also known as Andersin. He's the player that actually made some heads turn when he started playing with the Slimy Boogerman over in the past of 2021, and most recently of Dark Zero fame, and now the IGL for Nearest Airports, where you guys have been owning up the tier 2 scene and the North American tournaments, I guess. So Andy, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm just happy to be here. It's awesome to be back on the live show. I've done an interview section before in the past, and now I get an opportunity to talk with you guys about not only what I've been up to, but also LCQ and how I see things transitioning there.
Hell yeah. So thanks for the time to hang out with us today. So let's get right into it, because you talked about a little bit of your start, or how you had an interview with Ian before, as that you could find on Spotify, by the way, everybody. I'm going to have to plug that in. But if not, let's reiterate a bit how you got your start within Valorant, because I know when you had the conversation with Ian, you were mentioning how you had you were trying to compete a little bit more within like that CSGO scene in the past. You went to your first maybe even LAN event, if I'm not mistaken, with MCE, or if not, competed with him in the past as well. So would you have stayed within Counter-Strike if Counter-Strike still had the same type of support as Valorant did today, or was it something else that attracted you to join and play Valorant instead of CS?
I think it was just it happened during a very interesting point for a lot of people, because it's when COVID started. That's at the same time Valorant was coming out, and I was a software developer working full time at that point. So when we got sent home to start doing work, I was able to get a lot of my daily tasks done within a shorter amount of time than I would normally when being at the office. So I was playing Valorant with a couple of friends, specifically like Pure R, who played for XSET, and he and I were just grinding the game with friends. We eventually hit the ranked Valorant, and then when we saw a couple of like our old friends get signed to like Immortals, like Bjor and Kohler, and we realized they came from Counter-Strike, we were like, wait a second. Maybe this is completely viable. Maybe we could go pro, and that kind of like rejuvenated it. So even though like I was working full time, I had a little bit more to be able to throw it into playing the game, and I kind of ran with that for as long as I could. And then eventually that led to the Dahunka Bonkaloos making the close qualifier, and then getting signed by Dark Zero.
That's actually the next thing that I wanted to ask about. What was that process like, getting picked up by Dark Zero? Like, did they approach you? Because they were actually pretty new into Valorant, previously their only game being Rainbow Six. So that was kind of their newest venture into something outside of Siege.
It's kind of like it's a mixed feeling of emotions, because it's a little bit of a blur. Because I remember when I remember it was getting really stressful, because I started having to go back into the office. So I was actually going to work, doing my 8-hour like day, going on to practice, and then competing all of the night, and rinse and repeating that, and doing that all the time. So when we eventually had our really good close qualifier run, where I think we took out BBG, Beast Coast, and Space Station. Yeah, we took out all three of those guys. And then we made it to the close. We were approached by Soar Gaming and DZ, and then I think On the Way Esports, which eventually became the Noble squad that became TSM Academy. And DZ was the one that was most interested in relocating us, making sure that we were able to make this like a full-time job. It came with it was actual employment. It wasn't just like a contract. So when DZ approached us and we started down that process, it was just like it was like, guys, we gotta get this deal going. Like there's too many things that are happening in all of our lives. I think Screwface was finishing up college. We had a couple Canadian players. It was like we were all over the place, and it was an amazing process that eventually allowed us to get signed with DZ. And I remember just the feeling of relief when I finally was able to take pen to paper and realize that all the hard work that I had put in the past year while working full time was going to be paid off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so you've been doing a lot of that, if not all of it, as kind of the IGL of the teams that you've been playing on. I didn't hear the interview with Ian, but it says in here that you've got some stuff about kind of getting into the IGL role, playing against your dad. For me, the IGL role is one I think that has too much weight. I would feel like everything, if it goes wrong, it's my fault. Maybe you can kind of skew that thought process. Maybe you feel the same way. Can you talk to us about kind of getting into IGL and working through it?
That's actually kind of funny because I'm not the IGL for nearest airport.
Ooh.
I'm actually Aleko is, and this is something that I can talk about this because you're right. When the weight of like the when your team performs bad and you end up losing a match, the IGL is the one who takes the brunt of the responsibility. And that is something that I've also dealt with in the past because I have had to IGL in prior teams or in different situations, and I've always done that. So when Aleko came onto the squad and he was wanted to take up that mental responsibility as the IGL, I became a much more profound mid-rounder to reveal some of that stress and also be like, hey, I'm working in this with you. Because he's the one who makes a call at the beginning of every round, but then he and I will kind of work together and get the rounds to complete more efficiently. So he gets to be more in the game rather than kind of just having to be like the ward. Because I think with most IGLs and most systems, a lot of people look at their IGL as kind of dead weight because they're the ones focusing on the economy, the money, the ults, the strategies, the anti-strats. What are they doing? Looking for patterns. And one of the things that we wanted to do on nearest airport was he may be taking the brunt of that responsibility, but as players around us, specifically me, I can increase my game IQ to be able to allow us to run a more efficient system that in turn wins more.
So how does that system work in terms of preparing yourselves with, like, for example, Pearl just came out, and then you're like, okay, I'm faced now with this map. What type of agent composition should I run? How am I running this? So what's your thought process trying to develop the right quote unquote meta, the right composition, or the right strategies to be able to play a map? Because we talk about, especially on defense, it's all about trying to gain map control. So how do you piece all this together?
When you're looking at a new map, there's a couple of different factors that go into it. The first one would be, I think, like agent composition. You kind of look at the map, you look at the choke points, you look at how the engagements, like, are there going to be close engagement, far engagements? Are there a lot of are there a lot of different connectors? Are there a lot of like lurk potential? And you pick the agents that kind of fit those roles, and then you work with it. And then from there, you start to develop a game plan where it's like, okay, with this comp, what's the purpose of like this setup? What is the purpose of taking like say on Pearl, like how do we deal with holding art in Italy? How are we going to hold with dealing like with B long? How are we going to hold with this? And then you pick the agents and you kind of see what utility they can have and how it can be applied to taking those kind of control. So when you're asking me about how we create a game plan looking at a new map like Pearl, it's like, well, first, how are we going to deal with the taking map control? Secondly, what are our players' strengths and weaknesses? Because you always want to play into what your players are going to be naturally good at. If you try to condition them to play something that they're inherently just not going to be very comfortable on, even on a new map, you're going to fall into like inconsistencies. And then the third one is surprise factor. There's a lot of picks that I think people forget how to deal with. An example of that would be with the Phoenix buffs. Phoenix has a 6-orb alt. When you're playing Ascent, if you just orb farm, you literally play the game 6v5 for half of the rounds, just with that alone.
Yeah.
And that it's really easy to play against, but when you haven't seen it for so long, it's really easy to throw teams off of it. So when it comes to Pearl, it's like, do we want the consistency or do we want to throw teams off with just like a crazy pick that they're not going to be expecting, playing to our players' strengths, and then developing setups that are going to allow us to always be in an advantageous situation with our map control.
So with you talking about kind of like the process of coming up with these ideas, that's something that a more established, like big organization team is going to have the resources to have like a whole team of people working together to come up with that. Have you found that kind of being in like an unsigned team, there is a big difference between what it's like in terms of having support, you know, a lot of support staff behind you to be able to provide input? What is that difference like for you?
It's actually kind of funny because on my free agent team, I have more support staff than I actually did when I was playing on a signed professional
That's
team.
awesome.
And it's kind of crazy because I kid you not, there's probably 10 to 11 people, including the 5 players that are working with us on Nearest Airport, that are just doing it out of their free time, out of the goodness of their heart. And they have, again, this is no disrespect to my prior orgs, but they have taught me so much more about Valorant and how to structure, or basically how to build the underlying structure to a successful team. I feel like a year ago I would have said I knew a decent amount about Valorant. I knew a decent amount about like teamwork and whatnot. Now I feel like I've grown so much as a player, but I also know so much less. And it's funny to like feel like that. But I'm at the point in my career where the support staff I have now is absolutely phenomenal. We have an analyst who is picking up patterns against any team that we see as a threat, and we will build a game plan that's just like, all right, so or for example, like a match against DZ, because again, I live with Kyle and Adam, so I've told them this. Our analyst found that Ange was the key to their success. So if we took Ange out, their win percentage for the round went down to like 30%. So it's like if you take out Ange while playing, they have a 30% chance to win the rounds. And we were able to like find that analytical data, but due to the fact that we had a really awesome analyst working with us. And then as for coaches, it's like I have a head coach who is very harsh and very nitpicky with the criticism he's giving, but it's always valid because he's playing the statistics. And this is something that I've also learned as I've gone on, where a lot of the times in my past teams, I've been playing Valorant or making decisions that I wanted to like help teammates, or I was making emotional decisions. And what my head coach has kind of helped me, what Frost has helped me realize is I need to make decisions that are based on statistics. They all have to be, you got to play the stats. And the biggest example I could give of that is if letting one of my teammates die puts us in an advantageous situation because I play it then properly, I need to do that and not worry about wanting to help somebody too much because again, the emotions can't dictate how Valorant is played. It has to become more statistical and mathematical probabilities. Sorry, I know this is kind of like a little bit of a rant.
You're good.
No, this is super fun, actually.
So you want to help out the boys. You were a player for the boys previously. Now you're just trying to become a better all around player.
Yeah, it's the statistical part of it. An example of that would be on Ascent. It's like if you're getting mid crunched and there's 3 people in mid, you just react to one of the mains, and it doesn't matter if one of your guys is down mid. You get a bomb site for free, and as long as you're playing with that in mind, you're going to be able to make consciously better decisions that are going to lead to statistically more favorable round wins in your gameplay.
Well, and so you talked about these coaches, these analysts, kind of doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. Maybe you can't speak for them, but for you, right? Where does the motivation to just keep on keeping on, no matter kind of how tall the wall seems, for Andersin to want to climb? What is driving you, and maybe even the players or the coaches or analysts on your team that are doing it out of the kindness of their hearts?
I think what's driving me is I've always known I could compete at a top level, and I've always wanted to keep pushing myself. And now I'm in an environment where I am pushed every single day, and when I'm at that point, I'm like, this is what I've always wanted. And it doesn't matter if I'm a free agent. It doesn't matter who I'm playing with. If I'm learning and progressing, then that's progress. And even if I say ultimately fail in the end, I tried my best, and I can live with that. And that's kind of what's keeping me going forward. It's like if I'm going to fail, I want to know that I did my absolute best. And that involves aim training regimens, VOD reviewing, being very critical, going in after practice to review my own game with the coaches, work on my decision making, dry running in servers, being able to like even one thing that we recently started doing when that has really helped me is like as an omen, I suck at playing like a C site. So my teammates and I will go into a server and they will literally just hit C 20 times in a row and let me be able to like play with my utility and work on getting better as like a site anchor. And it's just like stuff like that where it's like I've never had this in other team environments. And even though I'm a free agent, it's like I feel like I'm better off than even when I was signed in terms of how much I'm progressing. It's a weird situation to be in, but I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to not only learn and apply myself, but being able to do it with a group of phenomenal people.
Yeah. And how difficult does this conversation come about now as a group where unfortunately at some point, because you are a free agent team, that this might get broken up, right? Because now we're talking about nearest airport with 11 people, including staff and players, but an org most likely might pick up a player or two or a team without the coach, without the analyst or whatnot, because they already have it under within their organization. So how does that come about within like the team structure that you currently have as a free agent team?
It's important to have those conversations because obviously that's a real situation that could potentially happen. But for us, or at least my mindset on it that I've discussed with my teammates is until we get to that point, let's just put our all in this. And we know that that may be a possibility. And if it does happen, we got to be happy for the opportunities that people are receiving. But it doesn't mean that we have to stop progressing and moving forward. And that's kind of like the mindset that I'm approaching it with, where it's like this might happen, but until it does, let's put our absolute all into this and let's keep working as hard as we possibly can to give us that opportunity, that chance. Because even if getting signed as like a team is like a 2% or 1% chance, that's still worth putting the effort in to get there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say. So obviously, one of the really big things that we've had come out in the news this year is this whole idea about what's going to happen in the 2023 format with this sort of pseudo franchising system with the partnership program. What was your initial reaction to that?
I was actually very optimistic about the process, but as the doors started to close more and more and more, it's a little worrisome. But I do not believe that Riot would not have plans in place that would allow tier 2 growth. They have a League of Legends system that is very successful. And there they have a tier 2 system that cultivates new talent to allow them to play in the tier 1. And I am going to have to believe that will be the same for Valorant.
So I guess to that point.
Okay.
Actually, tell us about that tweet.
Fair,
what is that tweet?
This tweet was implied when kind of everybody was getting dropped left and right because I haven't had, or I had some opportunities and some trials that I went along with, and then they didn't end up going in my favor. And then like I said, I live with Screwface and so then when they got dropped, we're all just like, oh fuck, we just moved. Now we have a lease, and everyone's homeless. We're just like, God damn it, man.
Yeah, shit.
So okay, so to that point for like the definitely not franchising, the Riot partnership. If not necessarily the tier 2 scene, because like you said, Riot has to be doing something with that. That is the only way that something makes it. We've seen franchising just absolutely murder things kind of across esports as a whole. How optimistic are you? We kind of talked about this on the show earlier, that maybe one of these teams that makes it into a partnership program is going to be looking for a full team, right? We singled out TSM as a whole, saying they haven't been really a top 10 team. I guess maybe top 10 you can put them in there. And they might make it into one of the 6 or 8 or 10 slots for the partnership program. At that point, they're probably looking for new players to then bolster their roster to be able to compete with the XSETs, the OpTics, and stuff like that. How optimistic are you maybe at that prospect, that nearest airport becomes a team that is in the partnership program?
That's kind of what we're hoping for, because I think what's happening now is a lot of these teams that have been dropped aren't competing. And I had a very controversial statement about that. Which actually, I'll share it. I'll out. I'll out
Yeah,
everybody.
hell
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
bring on the
Yeah.
It's
spice.
essentially, it's like if your team got dropped and you, as a 5, stopped playing together, you were never a team. You were actually just paycheck stealers. And now that a lot of teams are getting dropped and the players are just like posting their LFT posts, it's like they're not grinding, they're not trying. So my whole standpoint was like, listen, there might be an org that makes it into franchise. Like there potentially could be, again, the 1% chance. It's like there could be an org that makes it into the franchising, and they're going to be looking for a team. And what we need to do as a 5 is constantly keep working throughout this, because even though there's not a lot of opportunities, there's not a lot of like, it's a really grim future. It's like if we're at the top of everybody in this period of drought, when people start to come back in, or if there's that one team, we'll be the ones looked at. And that's the kind of mindset that I'm going in with it, and our team's going in with it. It's like we need to be at the top of everything right now, because when things, even when tier 2 gets like rejuvenated, say like we don't even get a franchising spot, but like say DZ comes back, if we're at the top of that, we'll be the first choice rather than all these other teams. And that will mean that all the work that we put in is still justified.
Ironically enough, just like Dark Ratio right now. They're just like grinding it out and doing awesome in a tier 2 scene.
So is that how... No. I was just going to say, is that how you see kind of the future for you guys? Do you envision you guys staying together as a team and then getting that opportunity to be picked up by an org and run off into the sunset together? Or do you see your future going a different way?
Realistically, that's the fever dream that we all hope for. But I'm prepared for the vast amount of different scenarios to be plausible. So it's like if that means us 5 staying together and getting picked up by an org, I would love that. If that means somebody or a couple individuals on our team get amazing opportunities, I'm happy for those people. And if ultimately at the end, if like all fails, if that means me going back into a job of just software development, I mean, I tried my best and I can be happy with that. And there's no regrets there, because again, throughout this entire opportunity of being able to play video games as a profession, I've met a lot of amazing individuals, and I've had a lot of life lessons that I could apply for years to come, and any kind of endeavor that I'll pursue.
For me, I kind of want to talk about this tier 2 scene, and at the same time talk about the label of tier 2, because when I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, and I even as a caster, I was like, oh yeah, like, you know, this person, X player, Y player, you know, has been grinding into tier 2 scene and now has an opportunity to play in an open circuit against TSM, blah blah blah. But I kind of almost feel at some point that the tier 2 scene could almost pretty much resemble the quality of matches and scrims and competition that you could get at the tier 1 level right now. So tell me a little bit about this quote unquote tier 2 scene in terms of the competition, the teams that you have to play against, the NSGs on LAN and online. Does it feel like if you don't make it into the franchise team and you're tier 2, you're just like bottom feeders at this point of the tier 1 scene, or how do you see this area of the competition?
I have a hot take on this.
Let's go.
If the tier 1 teams actually played in these NSG weeklies or the monthlies, they'd lose more than they'd win, and that's why they don't play, because they don't want to tarnish their own image. The reason, no, I know. I mean,
it's true.
Think about it. Like, the Knights, like I think 15K that DZ won.
Yeah.
They played version 1. They took out version 1. They played. Who else they played? There was like a couple T1 orgs that they played and they knocked out. But it's like people just say, oh, it's like a Mickey Mouse tournament, or people will throw the excuses of just like, oh, we were using it for practice, so it doesn't really matter. When in reality, a lot of these teams will not play it because they actually lose.
Yeah.
The difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is tier 1 is more refined on their fundamentals. So they will make less basic mistakes, but they still make mistakes. If you watch like I think it was, who did EG play? It was EG versus, let me look real quick. I don't know.
Are we looking at VCTs?
Yeah, I'm saying it was FaZe versus EG.
Yeah.
Even in LCQ, if you watch that game, oh my god, it is riddled through with mistakes. There are so many, it's not even funny. But the point being is if you throw FaZe against like a tier 2 team, FaZe would make less like minor mistakes than the tier 2 team would. But that doesn't mean that tier 2 team can upset the T1 team just because people are going to have bad days. So I don't see tier 2 as bottom feeders. I see it as the tier 1 teams are probably more afraid of the tier 2 teams than they are of other tier 1 teams. Because tier 1 teams are generally always they're going to play smart. They're going to play the stats. They're going to play the statistically everything they do is going to make sense, and then they're going to have their own plays. So it's like if you have proper anti-stratting and proper analytics on them, it's really easy to play against the tier 1 teams.
And just to add real quick too, it's like the example is also Pittsburgh Knights on Ascent when they almost went like 27-0 or something on that map and were unstoppable within that tournament. Open bracket, open qualifier qualifies for the group stages. Then the other one is Ghost Gaming, who's been playing in the NSGs for like the longest time without those tier 1 teams participating. But when they got into the group stages, also made some head turn within the group stages until playoffs happened and people realized how EG played. I think it's always like those big hit and misses once you're actually competing against each other, where Valorant then becomes, if you're on that day with the fundamentals that you've built within the structure that you've talked about here, Andersin, you could still beat any tier 1 team, which is interesting to see. But it's something.
I think one of the big ones was, do you remember a team called Zero Marksman Silver?
Yes.
Yeah, when they took out T1 and they took out TSM.
Yep.
And that was done. Actually, one of their players is a now supporting coach for our team because again, our coach Frost was working with them at the time.
Yes.
And what they showed us, what they did was just a lot of basic analytic work. They found out the patterns of how they were going to play on the map they were going to play. They abused the patterns and they won. Simple as that. Oh
shit! You guys have Frost?
Yeah, that's our coach.
Nice. That's actually awesome. Actually,
Hector's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
So I've got something kind of just like looping, or maybe even like talking about like the tier 1s not wanting to play in the tier 2s, whatever it may be. How do you feel about I feel like there's always a conversation for every team whether it's the top of the list or the bottom of the list that, we're saving strats. That to me feels like it's incredibly overplayed, but I'm also a peanut brain. I've never competed. I've never done something like that. So maybe how do you feel about that kind of excuse as, somebody just being like, well, we have to save strats and that's why we lose?
It's an excuse. That's most of the time their strat book isn't that well defined. There is no saving strats. It's just simply there is no gain for them to play it. So it's like if say like FaZe Clan. Say FaZe Clan was to play in like an NSG weekly. If they win it, they don't really get anything from it besides like extra practice and a tiny bit of money.
Yeah.
But if they lose it, they take a rep hit, a huge one. And then you have pissed off fans, and you have like the inconsistency. They're going to go down massively on their old leaderboard. So for them, it's safer to play in these bigger ones where they don't have to risk any of their brand. And they can just play in the VCT like system or the franchising one for the future. And they don't have to worry about any of that potential like catastrophe, because a lot of these T1 teams, even when like they're scrimming, regardless if they're practicing or not, they lose to the T2 teams all the time.
And even as one of the best examples too that I like to look at is Sentinels. Like even if you advertise that you are like the cream of the crop in North America and still lose, you could still fucking play with that and get the impressions and then still have so many fucking viewers for every fucking match that you play. So maybe sometimes depending on the branding, you just play along with that as well and see how you go from there. Because I think even for FaZe Clan, if they lose within the tier 2 scene, taking them for example again, they still have good enough branding to be like the Schmeeg or whatnot, to not lose too much as a whole team brand. But yeah, definitely as content creators and whatnot, I think they're doing a great job from player to player going to that, where even tier 2 players or even players that are trying to grind into that path to pro don't have that luxury to be able to to use their branding to keep that fan base around. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about Sentinels, actually, because it's time to go for a break. And when we come back, we're going to dive deep into the LCQ in North America, going match to match, and then we'll talk about Sentinels then. If you've enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and make sure you hit the bell for the future noties, but also comment below with what you'd like to see in our future shows. Welcome back, folks, here to Valoranting, where usually we would talk about every single region of LCQ, but as we're already an hour and 40 minutes within this show, and there's only 24 hours in a day, let's just focus on one region right now, and that is going to be North America, because we're also blessed with the presence of Andersin in the North American scene to talk about the LCQ. So without further ado, let's go right into the first game that kicked things off, that kicked out the whole clout of the VCT, LCQ, and NA. That is going to be talking about the Sentinels' first matchup against the Guard. And we talked a little bit about it on the show where I was like, okay, I can't wait to have Andersin come on so we can talk about this a little bit here, because when we look at this series, for me, when I casted this game, I was like, ah, shit, Saya player's still on a jet. We still have some Killjoy coming into the roster, so we're still going with like the type of like comfort picks that we currently see from the Guard. But looking at this series overall, it definitely seemed that there was a lot of like individualistic, heroic plays that came out from the Guard that really squeezed through this victory against Sentinels. But was there anything else that you saw, Andersin, looking at this series?
When you look at the series, something interesting to note is the fact that Guard didn't win any clutches. There is not a single. Maybe they won one, but if I'm remembering it correctly, there's not a single 1vX that they actually took home, which means that their players, when they were playing, there's a lot of hero moments and a lot of like good trading. Trent obviously was just absolutely fantastic, and to me, it looked like the Guard had a good game plan around what Sentinels was going to do and how they were going to play, and they were able to actively apply that real time, because they like. We just saw they were down in the beginning when they were playing, and they had to crawl their way back.
Yeah. And Tanner, when we're looking at this series too, a lot naturally came out through social media, even from the Sentinels account in itself. We're like, oh, maybe Shroud shouldn't have like planted so much or tried to plant so much overall. But I actually had like I've rewatched that match on Icebox, and am I wrong? Are my eyes too old where I'm like, Dapper did actually try to plant the spike a lot for the team, but kept dying. So it came down to a responsibility of Shroud to try to do that for that team. And everybody just went for that meme to just want to be at Shroud's throat for planting for the team.
Yeah, and that's so tough, because I think what may have happened, if not necessarily in this situation, right? I do it myself, is just kind of like instinctually pick up the spike and then just run with it. So if nobody's really paying direct attention to that, you can assume that Shroud is not paying direct attention to whether or not he's got the spike. And then obviously when you're in a close game that literally went like crazy OTs and 2 maps, it's just kind of a lot for Shroud alone to think, okay, hold on, where's Dapper? Dapper, come and take this. And there's just a lot of moving pieces. I did, and not to kind of steal the hosting thunder here, I wanted,
please go.
hoping, if possible, maybe Andy could give us what are your thoughts, being a player in the scene directly, on Shroud kind of joining Sentinels and the Valorant scene and stuff?
Oh, I want to be careful with how I say this. Shroud's an absolute legend of a player. He was he and Sean Garris were actually 2 of the players that I watched early on in Counter-Strike back in like 2014 when I was in high school and getting into esports as a whole. So there's always a special place in my heart for them. But when he joined Sentinels, I think it was a little overhyped, because Valorant's a very punishing and unforgiving game. There is so much that you have to constantly be aware of what people can do due to the abilities, the ults, the economy system is different than CS. And when you come from playing ranked, going into like a professional team environment, it's very, 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 very different. And like I said, it's very unforgiving and it's very punishing. So when Shroud got announced to play with Sentinels, I knew that he has the tactical FPS experience to be able to fit in, but I honestly didn't see him performing as well as everybody would have thought he was going to do, based on the role that he's playing, and secondly, based on the fact that he's just not going to have the same level of experience that all of these other players who've been professional in Valorant are going to have. Because again, Shroud's a legendary name. I think he's an amazing guy and he's an amazing player. But I think he's going to get better as time goes on. Where his first debut, I kind of was expecting Guard to win due to the fact that their team isn't as ironed out as they would probably like it to be.
Do you think that there was any amount of pressure on the team knowing that there was going to be a significant number of people watching? And given that we had this 600,000 plus peak viewership, what do you think as a player is the best way of just kind of like pushing through that and not letting that pressure you?
I actually don't even think that would have bothered Shroud because Shroud's so used to Twitch streaming with thousands of people watching him on the daily. I think actually I think it would have bothered the other players more, because again, all that pressure is on you. So it's like when you're going into that series and the fans are expecting you to win like 2-0, and the map is very very close and you're struggling, and then you start to make like a couple fundamental mistakes or your trades aren't exactly happening as they should in flow state, it can definitely start to build that pressure on, but you kind of have to just isolate your mind and play as if no one's watching. And you have to get into that mind state, because when you are thinking about other factors outside of the game, you're taken out of the moment, and then the moment you're taken out of the moment, you're no longer playing Valorant.
Okay. And then talking about Shroud, if you want to stay on that topic, because you were mentioning, Andersin, that he maybe wasn't as impressive on that first matchup, but on the second series when they played against Shopify Rebellion, this man was on the top all over. But is it more on Shroud's performances or Sentinels looking like they've improved from match to match, or is it more on Shopify Rebellion that they it was a matchup that it was theirs to lose?
This is where, again, it's a little bit of a hot take.
Keep going with the hot takes, man. That's why we got a podcast, man.
On NA, we scrimmed Shopify multiple times, and they were kind of underwhelming with what their game plan was and how they were approaching it. And again, it's a scrim; they could be practicing their own thing. But when we were playing them, they were quite easy to read, and it wasn't very it wasn't as difficult as it probably should have been. So it's not to discredit Sentinels. I think Sentinels is an extremely talented team, and I think that they, like Shroud again, played very, very well. But it could be a repercussion of multiple different factors. It could be Shopify was having a really bad day, or their game plan wasn't as thought out and diverse as they would have hoped it was, and Sentinels was just able to just collateral damage them. Because Sentinels is one of those teams where they go for a lot of engagements, and if Sentinels is just winning those engagements, they're going to keep on pressuring you. So if Shopify didn't have a response to that kind of pressure, which they didn't, they just lose, which is kind of what happened. And I think that's good for Sentinels, but I think as they go further and further in the bracket for LCQ, they're going to be challenged more on tactical depth rather than brute force power.
Yeah, so how much okay, so with Sentinels kind of making these changes, Shroud comes in, kind of an unknown, needs some time on the roster. They also picked up Zelsis, right? And Zelsis, I thought, had been a pretty standout player, especially in his role, kind of playing as that flex, the assists on the KO. When I think of Ascent and KO, I think Zelsis kind of just going crazy. Do you think how did you feel about that as well? To kind of bounce the same question, from Shroud to Zelsis now, do you think he's stronger? I guess, are we comparing him to Sick, kind of, right? Like, how do you feel about Zelsis?
I thought Jordan was going to be a really good pickup, because he's the kind of person where on V1 he was demonic. He was constantly the person. Like when you think of V1, it wasn't like you're not really scared of Penny, you're not really scared of Effie's, but the one who was constantly being like a name to be reckoned with was Zelsis. So when he joined Sentinels, again, you're adding to that brute force where it's like now you got Tens, you got Zelsis, you have Shroud, you have Dapper, you have Shaz. Every single one of them can take a game, where any one of them at any point could be the one to start dropping 30. So the only difference between Zelsis and Shroud, though, is Zelsis has been playing T1 for over a year and a half, almost 2 years at this point, where Shroud had just joined. So I expected Zelsis to perform as he did, where with Shroud, it's kind of like questioning to kind of see how his consistency is going to be there throughout the rest of these series to come.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we were all wondering too, like Zelsis, did he actually join this team to be the best team ever, or just to get the check mark, which he finally got? But
Hey,
we
well-
got the answer as well, right? He got the check mark and he's playing super well. So that's actually really cool to see. And what I actually did like to see from Sentinels too was that they weren't stubborn with their compositions anymore, because for the longest time we criticized them. Oh, well, it's gonna be Haven. We know what they're gonna play. If it's gonna be, you know, continuously playing the Jet, continuously playing a mediocre Raze, or trying to finally bring like some Fade and stuff in. And you actually saw Sentinels come out with triple initiator, not only on Ascent, but also bring it out on Breeze. So the work that they're putting in as a team to just develop a deeper playbook is actually quite nice. And we actually had a chance to ask that question for Shazam, as like, you know, bringing more composition outs, trying to adapt to the meta, and maybe even trying to shift into a different meta. And let's see what he has to say about that.
We want to add on to the stuff that we have. You know, now that we're playing matches, we're showing like some of the stuff in our strat book and our playbook. You know, we have the benefit of not having any matches played with this roster before, so people didn't know what to expect. And now that we're showing stuff, it's time to switch stuff up. It's time to like capitalize on this time to change stuff up and not let teams read us. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's part of the nature of like competition. It happens in every sport, every esport, and that's part of the thing. Like you have to switch up your stuff now that the more that you display what you have to constantly innovate and change stuff up.
Yeah. And that's why for me, when I'm listening to this so far, is like on paper, before actually being able to see Sentinels play their first official tournament, their first official game in LCQ, was like, they actually have what it takes to be able to play different roles now, if there's going to be any agent changes, any nerfs. So now that you finally have tens, for example, on a Chamber, if Chamber gets nerfed, then you could potentially put Dapper back into that Cypher role. Zelsis could go from playing a KO into a Raze if then they need a duelist and put the Chamber back into that. So your first impressions now looking at this roster, not only from the performances from the game, but do you think it's a deep enough core to be able to adapt to these different metas here, Andersin?
Oh yeah, definitely. The roster before, it was kind of sick flexing to everything.
Exactly.
And everyone was like, "What can't Sick do? He plays smokes. He's an initiator. He could be a duelist. He was everything Sentinels needed." But as the game got further and further more complex, the roles become more isolated, where you need someone who can be more flexible with what they like play. You can't just have a strictly a duelist one trick or a chamber one trick. You need them to be able to be vice versa and swap. And now not only do they have a core that is extremely dangerous just on paper, but they actually have agent compositions that will allow them to have sleeper pick comps that can throw teams off. I think one of the best examples of this in the world right now is Paper Rex or Paper Rex. Paper Rex is a team that will quite literally swap up their composition to counter like pick against the players or the team that they're facing. And they do an amazing job of that. And Sentinels now has the players that could potentially give them that power to do that in the near future. And I think that's going to be something really dangerous and cool to be able to like watch happen as well as just play against.
I have to say that, you know, I've been a big critic of Sentinels over time, and one of the big issues that I've taken is the fact that they have seemed very inflexible and unwilling to kind of step outside of their way of doing things and their MO that they really set in early 2021. And this kind of feels like it's that time where actually they're embracing those changes. Was that something that you would have said that you also felt about Sentinels and are glad, or I guess not glad to see, or was your kind of assessment of them a little different?
No, I was definitely on the same page there, where Sentinels was a team that in the beginning of Valorant, when I think they won not the first Masters. I forget which Masters it was.
It was Reykjavik.
Yeah.
They went
Reykjavik.
lossless.
They are an extremely good team at their fundamentals, and they didn't need to incorporate a deep map pool or deep agent pool, because where a lot of these teams were failing on their fundamentals, Sentinels didn't. So now that they're finally kind of realizing the error of their ways, because I think what they had was good, but they kind of milked it a little too long. But they were prone to not making those changes because what they had been doing was previously working, and it was working really, really well. But it's really awesome to finally see them adapt to what the future of Valorant is most likely going to look like.
Yeah, and now that the Guard versus Sentinels finished in that amazing series, a couple of them into overtimes too. The guard moves forward into the upper brackets, where even for me, I thought potentially even the guard versus C9 was going to be one of those games where, oh, well, C9 pops off the way that they did towards LCQ, then they should be able to take this. While you're looking at this head to head on the first map having Fracture, I see Saya player playing a Jet. And I'm like, oh shit, man, this is gonna be a rough one for the guard to try to get. But they seem to have been able to have some sort of good system by having Jonah P play a chamber. And now it seems that it's Jonah P that's flexing into potentially what Six doing for Sentinels, playing roles after role. So what's your thoughts on seeing the guards' performances so far outside of their heroic plays and trading fundamentals?
I think it's really cool to see, because I think Valen did an interview where he was talking about why they were just picking Saya and Jet, and it came down to something that I mentioned previously before, where it was you pick an agent that your player is extremely comfortable on. So when you put Saya on Jet, you're getting 100% the best kind of Saya that you're going to see, because that's his most natural role. And Valen was able to take the players on his team and put them on a role that they're going to excel on. And then he came up with a game plan that revolved around that. So even if the pick is unnatural, because most teams will run arrays due to the crazy amount of control you can get with arrays, Valen was able to call in a way that got the maximum efficiency for the players on their roles that they were playing with. And I think that is just awesome to see as an in-game leader, especially coming from someone as young as Valen is.
Yeah. 19 years old or 20 years old as an IGL and doing that. And actually, we do have that clip that you're actually talking about, the interview that Valen had. So let's have a listen in from his mouth how they thought up of this process.
I mean, we came out with a new comp that we haven't ran before. We have Saya on Jet. That's about it, honestly. It's just Saya's going out fragging. Everyone's playing well. I mean, we just have really good chemistry on that map. And I think that's why we're really good on it, is because everyone's really comfortable, and we came out with the surprise factor running a different comp, and I don't think they were ready for it. Yeah, I mean, the meta on Fracture, I don't think anyone runs Jet. Like, I haven't seen any teams run Jet. It's usually always Raze and Neon. But the system we built around the Jet works for us very well. And just having Sai on the Jet is just so strong for us. So we created a system that no one really runs, and we made everything from scratch. Shout out to MCE and Cupert. They do a lot of that kind of stuff. And when you make everything from scratch, teams don't know how to prepare for you. And even if the comp on paper doesn't look as strong as others, if you build a great system around it, you can make anything work in this game.
And that they did against C9 on that series. And speaking of C9, because for me, they were a team that ran like a pretty unorthodox composition overall, with only having one flasher in their lineup for Fracture, for example. Do we actually see that overall C9 still maybe has lost a little bit more now that they have Curry playing instead of Zeta that moved over to T1? Or can we actually drop that storyline here, Tanner, where it's more about the guard's success than C9's performances?
No, and I think looking at kind of the history of Curry and what Curry has done as a player, I thought that this would look just as good, if not better, with Zeta leaving and Curry coming in. It just seems, it feels like they're in a situation where Curry is unable to fill those same shoes, and not to kind of take away from what Curry can do as a player, but I think we've seen over and over, looking at the guard almost specifically, whereas sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't. And at the beginning, you could just say, Curry might just need more time to be implemented because the change happened in such a strange spot in stage 2. But now we're to those points to where it seems like maybe it's the pressure or maybe it's the role. Curry just, seems to be drowning.
I feel like one of the things that you have to kind of consider with stuff like this is it's not even necessarily an indictment on his ability as a player, but sometimes it can come down to things. And maybe, Andersin, this is something that you can have some input on, given that of all of us, you're the only one who's played in a team. But like,
I played for Egg Enthusiasts for the Boomerang tournament.
Okay, if that's what you want to, written on your grave, that's fine. But like, I think he's done a bit more than you, fans.
True.
But I think sometimes it comes down to also, like, for example, like intuitive decisions, like, you know, decision A, Zeta may not have needed to be told to do, whereas Curry might do. And there might also be decisions that Curry doesn't need to be told to do, but Zeta did. But just for the rest of the team and how it fits in with their calling and the way that they talk about things and mid-round and stuff, it may be that those things that Zeta did/didn't need to be told fit way more in with the system of Cloud9.
I think it's a mix of that and kind of what Valen was saying, because when you have a C9 had Zeta on the team for I think like a year, it was quite a long time, and when you have a player get so incorporated into a system like that, and he's so key to your fundamental success, especially as an initiator, and you replace it with another initiator player, the plug and play is actually quite difficult. Initiator isn't exactly an easy role to just plop in and immediately perform at 100% efficiency. I honestly think if Cloud9 had a couple more months to prepare for this LCQ, they probably would have been closer to favorites to win, because usually their core works really, really well. But right now what you're seeing is just, you're kind of seeing like lackluster pieces mixed off with just like off timings of how they're playing it. But then when you also add the fact that Valen or the guard is building comps and game plans that they haven't run in the past, you're adding another layer to it, because now not only does Curry have to live up to the expectations that the team is set in front of him, he also has to change those expectations to the game plan that the guard is playing. Because when you throw a Jet on Fracture and when they traditionally run a Raze, and now the game plan's different, your game plan on C9 is completely different, and now it's kind of like you're playing mind games. And to be able to perform at the T1 level with little bit of time, and then on top of it, you have to change the way you're playing based on what the enemy team is doing on a comp that you hadn't seen in the past. That's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so and this question to anybody, I would say more directly Vansili or Andersin, because I know that you guys watch games like absolute madmen. And so I was at Astral Clash when this game actually played, and I know Gio had some plans as well, but Valen talked about the Jet on Fracture and doing something different and something comfortable on Saya Player. And then Saya Player actually comes in and kind of lays like a stinker of an egg and bottom frags on the Jet and doesn't really do the duelist job. Is there something else? Is there something that I'm missing that the Jet actually brings into, even in having a poor performance, right? Is there something that is whether it be mental or just around the map in general, that this Jet actually brought to the table in this specific matchup?
I could answer that.
Yeah, go ahead first, Andrew.
There's two get out of jail free cards with the Jet and Chamber. So with Raze, when you think about entry pathing, with Jet, it's throw a smoke, dash into it, clear the close angles, or clear whatever angles that you've approached with the entry pathing. With Raze, there's less protection because there's nothing you can hide in. So when you're creating that space for your team, you're going on a specific entry pathing that with specific utility that can't really be changed. Otherwise, you're adding all these like extra variables. So it's like if you were to play like Raze, you're double satchelating into Heaven, you're gonna do it a specific way with your breach utility, and you're gonna like stun Heaven flash to be able to get in there, and you're consistently gonna see the same thing because that's what you've got back on the server. But with Jet, you get this like wild card where like if the plan needs to change, Jet just throws a smoke this way, dashes in, and look both ways, and that Jet most likely is surviving in that smoke.
Yeah.
Where if you're Raze, you can't do that. So even though Saya's performance may not have been to a traditional, I guess, like carry expectation, his 12 kills, 17 deaths, that value you're going to be seeing in other ways, and then that allows your other teammates to kind of do the cleanup, which is why you see like Valen and Nat and Jonah P doing really, really well in the roles, and then Trent supporting.
Yep.
So that level of that like small change within the character completely changed the dynamic of how you would approach the map, and then makes the defense or makes the attack for Cloud9 a lot harder, because now they have to worry about two potential people opping two separate lanes, and then the gamble stacks, the rotates. They're just going to have so much more map control than you are with Raze. Because with Raze, again, you got to use that Raze to take control, but it's going to be set control. Where with a Jet or a Chamber, it's going to get on this lane, op it, dash away when they come.
So this is my question then, because one of the things you mentioned there was the fact that it makes it really hard for Cloud9's attack. But in that map, you can see that Cloud9 actually had a pretty decent run of 6 defensive rounds in a row. My question to you is there a risk of this composition that the Guard have run on Fracture specifically, of having the kind of Neon on Haven effect, where it's really good on one half and is kind of weak on the other, and that's eventually going to get exploited?
Yeah, but I think that's like with every single comp. If you run it enough times, I think a big contender of that would be Sentinels. Sentinels ran the same comp for months at a time.
Long time.
And eventually, slowly but surely, people learned how to deal with it. And then when they were dealt with it, they didn't change. The thing that I like about the Guard is they're willing to change it against the opponent they're playing against. So the moment this like this Fracture game they played like the Jet, I really wouldn't be that surprised with the next Fractured game they play against a different team. The Jet might not even get picked. And I think that's like a really interesting component to talk about there.
And to add on a little bit too about the meta or the comp that they were using on Fracture, even for me, an opportunity to nerd out a bit. If you look at one of the comps or one of the strats that were set up here for the Guard as well, is them not playing a Viper means you're not going to split across like a full wall on your hit on the B site. And the space that you create from Saya into one of the executions was him actually dashing from the top of the B stairs into Canteen, following flashes coming out from their breach, which then allows for them to actually push more towards spawn than to try to fight for the standard execution and take control of Heaven and play the pulse plant. So the pulse plant, usually when you're playing in front for a plant for long B or from arcade, you now allow players to push more and to cut rotations into spawn on top of that too. And the beauty of having that Jet as well on your defense allows you to play a double op setup, which they currently did on Breeze against Sentinels, for example, too. So now you're playing on your comfort picks and you built that system that plays very well to the strengths of your players, because Jonah P could also op, and he's played very, very well. So on different roles, especially on this chamber now. So overall, looking at the Guard's performances, and I want to just throw it out there for anybody to take. Have you been surprised into the Guard's performances so far in the LCQ versus what we've seen from stage 1 to the drop off in stage 2?
I would say, kind of based on everything that I know about the Guard and kind of like their practice and what they've been working on, I'm not that surprised for this one.
Yeah. Tanner?
I don't know. I think I need to see a little bit more, because you have a really close match with Sentinels, and that's a team that you probably should just smash. You should beat the hell out of Sentinels, especially with what they've got going on. And then Cloud9, kind of same thing. If this was Cloud9 of old and the Guard now, I would think, and then Guard beat them, I'd be like, okay, yeah, Guard are back to form. But again, it's their last couple opponents, not to take away from them, but they are obviously working through some things where they haven't been able to play at their fullest power. Or at their peak. So I think, what is it? It's Guard versus FaZe. I think this is going to be like their ultimate test. And if they beat FaZe, Guard are winning champions. There, I'm saying. If they beat FaZe, Guard are winning champions.
You heard it, MC. He's just saying it because MC's in chat right now, you know? Shout out to Matt right now. But let's move on to that topic as well, because we're talking about, you know, the comfort picks, quote unquote, that we've had from certain players, and you create your own style and basically almost even create your own meta based on that team. And I want to use that specific example on Ascent, because a tweet came out most recently from Slow is Cool, the analyst from Ninth, saying that, you know, looking at the master stage, FPX and PRX probably played the best Ascent because they have a duelist in their comp, being a Raze and a Jet, more specifically for these two teams. Then you look, for example, in North America, where you had a triple initiator setup from EG and from OpTic that actually helped them for a bit until they got into the master stage. Then you have 100 Thieves are playing no Sentinels as well, but only 2 initiators. And now, even speaking of the Guard, they're playing the Killjoy still and the Jet still. So what's your thoughts currently on is there a right way to play a map like Ascent so far in the LCQ, Andersin?
I don't think it's as clear cut as that. I don't think there's just like a one single way to play Ascent. Like it's like it's like the secret to cooking in the back of your mom's kitchen that you just pull out. You're like, ah, this is how we do it.
Yeah, yeah.
What I think is happening is these teams develop a game plan around their compositions. Either that's double initiator, zero duelist, or two duelist, or one duelist. And what they try to do is put that like simple sticker where it's like one comp wins everything. But that's not the case, because there's certain comps that are direct, or there's certain characters that directly counter other characters. So say maybe your double initiator worked really, really well against a comp that was running two duelists, and they didn't have as much info as you did, so you were able to better rotate and have people on sites when they were hitting, or your retakes were really, really phenomenal. But what against a team that has really good post plans with like their kind of utility, and then suddenly your comp isn't working as much, or like on attack running into that killjoy could be extremely detrimental. But if you know how to disable that killjoy before you're actually going into the attack phase to get onto the bomb plant, and you're using your utility effectively, that could completely change the course of the game. What I see happening is teams aren't doing a good enough job preparing against the player or the teams and their composition and their game plan, so that when you have these matchups, it really comes down to who's going to read the game more appropriately and have better, I guess, game IQ in their like micro decision making that allows them to then excel.
And Gio, how do you currently see the format here and the evolution of this map being played on Ascent? Like, is the no duelist the way or not the way currently in competition play?
The thing that I feel like I'm starting to notice, and I'm quite happy to see it, is that teams are starting to sort of deviate the way that they play towards what they feel is characteristic and right for them, rather than trying to do what everybody else is doing. There will always be a meta, that's how it works, but I think that teams are starting to play a little bit more individualistically. So I'm actually not necessarily convinced that it's going to be like, oh, everyone's moving back to like at least one duelist because that's the way it should be played. Like, I think that there will be teams who are perfectly happy to play with no duelists. There'll be teams who may try double duelist, I don't know. And the teams that do play with a duelist may decide to play with different ones. And that's kind of what I would like to see, is that we see teams leaning a little bit more into the fact that they understand that their players can be more flexible now, because we've known for some time in Valorant at this point, and it was something that Andersin mentioned earlier, but we've known for some time in this game now that you can't just one trick a role. They're not entirely separate. There are blurred lines between them. And so I think the opportunity for flexing between compositions is a lot more abundant now. And also just teams kind of learning that, you know, what works for them individually and where their own like domain boundaries are, in terms of, you know, there may be agents that they feel their roster doesn't cover, and that's cool, but there may be agents that they feel their roster does cover, and so they might like switch between them. And I think, to be honest, that is probably the most powerful position that you can be in, is know that you have different options to you. And so whether or not that will happen, I mean, it looks like the trend is kind of going that way more than any other time in the past. But that's what I would like to see them lean a little bit more into. And I have optimism that it will at least be somewhat that way.
Yeah, I also feel like, just as anybody does when we see these changes, right? Astra kind of gets nerfed into the ground, or nerfed enough to where people aren't touching her at all. And it's like, wow, the game is moving so fast. So this comp looks so good because look at the chokes on Ascent. We can seize, then we can fragment, then we can paint shells on top of it, and like that's great for defense. That works awesome. And then we fall onto that fallacy that everybody probably had and still has, of Chamber being like, yeah, Chamber sure is a duelist. Like, we can play him attacking side aggressively, and this will work. And on paper, that probably all seems fine. But then as we see it start to play out, it doesn't work for some of these teams. And I think the hardest part about it is, this year, really since start to, you know, coming up on finish here in September, there hasn't been enough time, or I guess scrimbucks are scrimbucks, but the only officials that you're playing and trying these matchups out in, or these comps out in, are the ones that mean the most in the world, right? So it just sucks that you're you're trying it out for your team has to be on the largest of stages in when everything is on the line. So I think with this year, and there being some downtime towards the end coming into 2023, barring any crazy changes between agents and maps and stuff like that leading into that, in that downtime, stuff can really be fleshed out. Right now, it's kind of just, hey, this looks like it works. Okay, it worked in scrims. Now let's go play it in officials. We got shit on.
Yeah, and speaking of getting shit on, it was like from map to map between the 100 Thieves and FaZe until we finally saw like some. I would like to say that even though it was domination from FaZe on a one-sided end on the third map of Ascent, we still had a pretty good, entertaining matchup just on how Baby Bay's performance on this map was against 100 Thieves. Somehow always managed to get behind enemy lines, but I think his pistol round with the Sheriff just shows like that same type of like working the economy for FaZe is part of their game plan with this type of composition. And what I'm trying to get at is trying to farm these kills on Baby Bay on pistol rounds so that he could have Bladestorm or at least a Vandal on second round and then Bladestorm on third guaranteed, so they could always have a very strong buy against any type of like bonus rounds they'll have against our opponents. Will allow for them to come back within this game. Therefore, them winning 11 rounds in a row on this third map against 100 Thieves to be able to beat them and move on to face against the guard in the upper finals. So, Andersin, did you see anything else outside of Baby Bay just owning on Ascent? Was it just 100 Thieves just not looking the best here?
It's kind of funny because when FaZe is a team where I had the pleasure to work with Xavier or Flya for a couple weeks before he actually got promoted to play with the FaZe guys.
Yeah.
And the way Flya likes to, because Flya was calling for us, and the way he likes to orchestrate a lot of his strategies is they're heavily thought out, and they're meant to set up your duelist players to really have success. And the way, from what I know, what he told us about, is FaZe is a well-oiled machine to allow Dicey and Baby Bay to frag out. And when we were watching this game, it's actually funny. Our assistant coach Alex, the moment when it was 9-3, he was like, "If FaZe win pistol, they're gonna win the game because that's gonna get the momentum rolling, and then their FaZe is gonna take entire control of kind of the pace of the game, and they're not gonna let 100 Thieves do what 100 Thieves wants to do, and FaZe is gonna win." And we were kind of laughing. We're like, "Oh yeah, we'll see." Like a 9-3 curse, like the jokes about it. But then as the round started to stack, it was like FaZe just had complete control. There was nothing that 100 Thieves was doing that was allowing FaZe to kind of get on the back pedal. The entire time, it was just like, all right, Baby Bay got that 3K, he won the pistol. It was like, all right, pedal to the metal, and they just went the entire way.
Yeah, and they definitely did at that, because even I was saying during the stage 2 when we were looking at FaZe's performances, because they were doing almost like a reverse sweep into the group stages because they played the strongest teams at the beginning, was like, how do you shut down Baby Bay basically on piss around, and how do you shut down Dicey on the anti-eco, or on their eco if you're able to shut down Baby Bay, because Dicey with the headhunter could actually turn things around as well, him having the most first bloods basically for the team too when you think it should be Baby Bay. And you already saw the ACS there. I think he only had 2 kills on defense for Baby Bay at that point, and then dropped like 20 kills. It was fucking sick. And even like one of the rounds where he flanked and updrafted on top of Stellar's wall to actually kill people at the B site, that shit was fucking awesome. That's some of the stuff that you just see on the fly that Baby Bay will just do, and it's just like, oh shit, just Baby Bay things. But I feel that it's definitely stems like even deeper than that as well, when you saw the performances of 100 Thieves in their defender or their attacker half, of this very map. And we actually do have a conversation, or we have a conversation. There you go. That's the updraft that I was talking about there. So we did have a conversation with Mike HD, the analyst of 100 Thieves, and let's see what he had to say as they digested the results there after the third map against FaZe.
Sure. So I mean, we even made some mistakes on the first half of Ascent. Could have definitely been a lot closer. You could argue that last round too, I think we're up in a 5v2. We could have booked that way, make it a 10-2. I think overall it was a lot of, I don't know if it was overconfidence going into the next half. I think we're pretty like even keeled when it comes to that. I think On second half as well, we slowed down a lot compared to our normal pace. Like I think if you would compare our cent half yesterday on attack versus NRG versus the one versus FaZe, they were very timid today. It felt like, and again, if you hesitate versus the FaZe guys, there's a lot of times where I felt like we were in really good positions. We were just like 3v1 swinging poised on Cat. Same thing with Baby Bay and Market, and then you know, if your spacing's not right or if you're stacked on top of each other, we're just getting sprayed down every time. So it felt like a lot of mistakes like that on our end. Then obviously they just punished it all, but I think playing a lot slower, a lot more timid was part of the issue because obviously we don't have a duelist, so you have to take space where you can get it a lot of the time.
And there you go. I think being timid against FaZe is probably something that you can't do when FaZe their whole strat revolves around not being timid and just shove shit down your throat when they're playing as a group. So I thought that was some nice insight coming in from Mike's, and we'll see how they're gonna do now in the lower bracket run for the LCQ. But overall, when you're looking outside of Baby Bay and outside of Dicey, there was still great performances from Superman, for example, or Tanner, because Superman seems like he was bringing out his performances from the Superman from LCQ of last year with Rise from the past.
Yeah, and I forgot where I'd seen this. It was on that map. Okay, I think it was like the defensive half of that map. Superman's headshot percentage was just insane. You know, it's one of those things where FaZe have a strong 5, but like Andy had said, right, they look to set up Dicey and Baby Bay. But even in the rounds where Baby Bay would die early or Dicey would die early, Super was always there to clean things up. The casters or the analysts, I think it was, had said it that coming into this, Super looked like the best, and walking out of this, even though the numbers, weren't a 30 bomb from Super, everything else that he did, I think kind of keeps him at the very top there, saying, yeah, Super really is playing the best in the tournament right now.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
And honestly, that's like one of the scariest things about FaZe is if you give them an inch, they will take a mile, and if Dicey and Baby Bay don't pop off, the other ones will.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a 5-man threat constantly, where it's like if you give them even the slightest bit of hesitation, like Mike was saying, they will take it and they will run with it, and then you'll be wondering how the heck did they take away that lead? And they do, and they'll do that consistently.
Like also on with the Superman especially is like there is really something that kind of highlights that consistency is if you look at the statistics from the Ascent map, you look at things like, okay, yeah, Baby Bay, he got 2 4Ks and he's this big flashy player, but the fact that Superman got 5 2Ks I think is also says quite a lot. That's the highest number of 2Ks of anyone in the server. Now usually you'd expect a good player to maybe get like a few, but I think getting that many, that is the difference between having a substantial man advantage in a round and not. And so for that to be something that he did so consistently within those rounds, I think is also something worth noting.
Agreed. Superman, great anchor player as well. And then you have Flya, that's a great initiator, so also good in the clutch. So that means that you are able, as a system for FaZe, to have Baby Bay and Dicey just push that W at the beginning and then have the rest, like almost old school like 100 Thieves style, when it was Asuna and Dicey just die and just let the boomers try to do the job, and FaZe seems to implement that quite well with the Spiegway, and now we have like a matchup between the Guard and FaZe where both teams are looking very confident with superpower play. So I'm looking forward for this weekend when this matchup is going to go live, and I think that's like Thursday or Friday, so that's going to be pretty fucking sick. But we'll stay within the lines of what's going on with LCQ now into the lower brackets, where unfortunately we saw the elimination of Shopify Rebellion when they played against Sentinels. What was it, Sunday or Saturday? That said, though, this is a nice little revenge match for Sentinels too, because the last time that these two met against each other, it was Shopify Rebellion, also known as Luminosity the Pass, won the last 2 encounters against Sentinels. So a brand new roster, brand new comps going into this one too, where unfortunately a brand new comp with Yoru on Breeze wasn't really the FPX way, where there was a little bit of a success from FPX with Angel playing Yoru from there, Tanner.
Yeah, this definitely didn't yield the same results. I also think that is one of the scariest spots to be playing Sentinels, And with the adversity that Shopify was dealing with, I have a buddy who doesn't really watch Valorant, but he's like, "Oh man, Shroud's back at it," and I was like, "Oh well, he looked a little watered down in the first series, but I think, and rightfully so, but I think moving forward, he's gonna look scary as hell." And that's exactly what happened in that series. It's like, that's a really tough team to go against, and then with Shopify. Outside of their recent sicknesses, even in just kind of this roster toss up where LG in the middle of everything is like, hey guys, we're pulling the plug. And then the players are kind of just like left to figure it out. I obviously don't know what went on behind the scenes, if Shopify was always going to take over, but I think there was just so much more to think about for, these five, I guess six coach involved, than just, hey, let's focus on LCQ. There was a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Sick being one. The other one is like, okay, well, even Shopify Rebellion did move into the next stage of the partnership program conversations with Riot. So maybe that's a little bit less behind your mind when you're actually playing the game to try to make it to champions in Istanbul. But it's still going to be one of those lingering moments of like, oh shit, if it's over now, then it could potentially be over for us, even moving into 2023. But looking at this matchup overall, when you're seeing Shopify Rebellion play against Sentinels and you see this composition on Breeze, even at some point there was like 4 players walking inside Shroud's Viper's Pit on Breeze when Shroud was holding the defense on A, and I was like, why the fuck are we just walking into Viper's Pit this way to try to clear that pit? Is there something that I'm missing in terms of how you want to scale up into this ult here, Andersin?
It really depends on the kind of utility that they have. So the thing that I think to note is they do have like pistols.
Yeah.
And they're not like, it's so hard because that Viper's Pit, they're trying to overwhelm them. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to have like one guy see him and then the rest just surround him because you can do that on gun rounds. But something that Shopify was missing is the utility that usually comes with it. Either that be a drone or a dart, or if you're playing Sky, a dog. But when you don't have any of that utility, you're kind of just walking to your death. And like, you got to understand who you're up against too. It's like, granted, we have pistols, we could try our best, but you're against Shroud, and you guys are on an eco, and you're not even sending any kind of bit of utility in there to figure out where he is. You guys are going straight to the grave, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thoughts on Euro here, Gio, on the map? Was it like the pick that could have maybe caught Sentinels off guard? Or was like, oh shit, it's like, I know in hindsight maybe it was the worst pick, but looking into it.
I was actually like thinking of asking you the same question pretty much because I find I don't know, I'm always a bit of like a Yoru skeptic, but I think one of the, I don't know, I was gonna say like Breeze is just such a big map, and like I don't know, I think that sometimes like Yoru can just do like a really good job in like smaller like enclosed areas, and maybe it could have also been something that had they put it on a different player. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to me because I was quite critical of Mada back in stage 1 because I didn't really like the way he played KO. And I feel like the Yoru's kind of been the same thing. He didn't really get a ton of value like himself. We didn't see him get like any, he actually didn't get any multi-kills. At all. And it's just sort of like, could you have brought something better? Probably. And I think that, yes, you can go down the line of thinking of, oh, you know, this is going to take them by surprise. Like, how are they going to deal with this? But like we've discussed, Sentinels are a very skilled team. They have great fundamentals. And ultimately, if you don't personally feel like your best performance is on that agent, it doesn't matter how out of, you know, left field it feels like it could be to your opponent, you're probably not going to perform sufficiently to be able to have that effect in the long run anyway. So I think I would have preferred to have seen Mada on an agent that just he has some more experience on, he feels a bit more comfortable on, and isn't trying to sort of pull the rug out from under Sentinels, because I just don't think it's going to work.
I agree, because even when you're looking at how Mata played that map too, especially on the attack, and you want to compare it versus FPX, is that at least for Angel, what I like is that they had a lot of nerdy stuff with the decoy to actually get into these sites, so that if people shot the decoys, he TPs behind him, while the rest are still scaling up on the other end of pyramids if they're coming through mid. But what Mata was kind of doing was just throwing the decoy randomly like 30 seconds or 10 seconds into the round, where it's not going to do much except for like footstep fakes that we actually never really fell for Sentinels. And the time that they had the best value out of the Euro kit was when he actually ulted and laid all of his utility against 10s behind Pyramid, where he actually got the kill. But an ult is going to cost 7 ult points. So you're only going to be able to do that like once or twice within the half, where there you go. They didn't have like maybe the best results going into Breeze with how they wanted to get their attack their attack side going. Sorry, because they got 1 round actually on attack, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that maybe I'm along the lines of maybe what you're trying to pull out to try to win against Sentinels should have been something outside of this Yoru. Tanner, you had something to add as well here.
Yeah, I think so. It's not specifically about Mata on the Yoru, but it is kind of what the Yoru did to the team. Previously, Mata no longer playing the flex. It's Tig now to play the flex, which puts Moose on the Viper, who was previously playing the Cypher. And I think when they were LG, now Shopify, Moose on anything that's able to play around the map that's the Moose that you want. Although, Meese, I think Meese is the plural. It's supposed to be sneaky. Moose is. And Moose is so good at lurking. Playing Moose late in mid on Breeze more specifically, and I think that this kind of just handcuffed one of the strengths for this Shopify team, that really on any map, Moose being able to kind of have freedom around it means good things, and you know, not being able to do that here stinks.
At least strat wise, it didn't look like it was the best for Shopify Rebellion. But once we got into that second map, I think it's great to talk about individual plays too. And that's, again, talking about Mata, but also talking about Moose. Those 2 players overall on Fracture definitely didn't want to go home. And Andersin, I think you saw the same thing, man. These guys fucking popped off, trying to carry the team on their back, moving into overtime into the second map.
It's actually kind of funny because I think fundamentally on Breeze, Shopify's game plan was kind of terrible. They put Mata on a Euro pick, which we've kind of belittled. I don't like kind of like belittling players, but it's kind of sad to see because there's so much innovation you can do with Yoru, and what Shopify did was they kind of just copied what other teams have already done. So it kind of felt like that like old thing where it's like, hey, can I see what you put down? Just don't copy my answer. The person just copies it. That's kind of what it felt like Shopify did on Breeze. But on Fractured, I actually think Shopify played quite well, but there's a couple other factors that go into it, where it's like how well is like Shopify with handling pressure versus how well is Sentinels with it. Sentinels probably is going to handle that like a lot better than the players of Shopify due to just like their background and whatnot. So even though Moose and Mata were really popping off, you could see the pressure getting to the other players with their own personal like decision making, or their just overall communication was just slightly off in just a couple situations, which unfortunately didn't go their way.
Yeah, and even when you're looking at the fundamentals or how they ran their preparations, copying the homework of FPX where it didn't work out, in general, the preparation was tough for Shopify Rebellion because, a couple of players were struck with COVID, and, Mac actually had something to say about that as well, where unfortunately they got knocked out, and then they had an opportunity to talk with us. So let's have a listen in and see what he has to say about that matchup.
Well, fuck, I mean, I guess I can reveal every secret. For the last 2 weeks, we haven't been able to practice more than 4 scrims with our main team because we got hit by COVID at boot camp. So really just like one person got it, can't come into the office, then another person gets it, can't come into the office, basically for 2 weeks. So our focus this tournament was just to use what we had from before and just kind of fucking, play really loose and play with a lot of teamwork. Unfortunately, I think having no prep wasn't, like minimum time to prep was like the worst thing that could have happened for us. Maybe a day would have helped, but I still think that we severely misplayed both maps that we played today. So I don't think an extra day would have done much for us. I think it was on us today.
Yeah, and I even think that, when you're trying to do all that prep for the event, where you were being played with feeling a little bit stale going into stage 2 as well, because at some point, looking at their plays on Icebox, they were still pulling out Arena on Mata, for example, and try to at least just go through the fragging abilities and capabilities of Mata to try to win the round. So you're trying to study a little bit more deep into that, trying to develop the playbook to get ready for LCQ, and then boom, COVID fucking hits. But Andersin, I think you're thinking on something here, so I want to know your thoughts.
No, it's kind of that kind of confirmed what I was like thinking with how Mac was saying it. It's they didn't have time to prep, so like again, their Breeze game plan looked kind of outdated. It looked like it was just stuff that the your TPs was stuff that other people have already done. So when Sentinels is playing against that, there's only like when you're playing against a Yoru on Breeze, it's like if it's a team that naturally doesn't run it, you're like, okay, what are they gonna do? And then you start listing off the things. It's like, okay, these are the common TPs done. And if they didn't get a lot of time to diversify their game plan, Breeze handling the way it kind of makes sense, especially since they weren't able to practice as much. So it's just it's very unlucky for them, and it's overall, I can understand how they feel about it. Where it's just like disappointing results based on some circumstances which were in their control and other ones that weren't.
Yeah. And I want to talk about one more team here going into the LCQ, because we usually talk about all 8 teams, but I told Gio this show is only 2 hours usually, and we're already at 2 hours and a half. And she's in the UK, she's got to sleep, man. So let's talk about energy. And it's not your fault, by the way. I understand we're the ones that always talk a shit ton on this show. We're like, oh, it's only going to be an hour show, but we just keep going, But let's talk about energy. For me, I was coining energy to be the ones that are going to win the LCQ, and maybe some people think that I might have a hot take by predicting energy to go all the way. So, Andersin, do you feel that energy is like a dark horse of this tournament, a favorite, or am I just totally off as well on predicting energy?
I think they're a very dangerous team. All of their players are extremely talented. Their game plans are usually pretty thorough. It just kind of feels lackluster in some scenarios, because I think let me look at this real quick. Yeah, they lost to 100 Thieves, and their loss was kind of a toss, in my opinion. They should have closed out Ascent a whole lot earlier. Icebox should have been closed out earlier. Like they had Icebox before it even was 13-11, but they threw a couple rounds. And then on Ascent, that one definitely should have been theirs based on how they were playing it. They just fucked up a couple of their late round decision making.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like energy has the ability to be that dark horse, but it really comes down to, are they going to apply everything at 100% capacity when the time comes to play?
Yeah. I like that you didn't mention Bind, because they definitely got slapped by 100 Thieves on Bind, man.
They got outclassed on Bind.
Yeah, 100 Thieves' utility on Bind was fucking sick in terms of timing into that, and I think they tried to implement that as well when they played later on in the brackets too, against EG, but they were actually like missing a little bit of those. Like they were trying to do like the orbital strike and seize combos, didn't get any kills out to that. But I think what really shines for this roster is the sheer fragging power of this roster too, because Som's popping off, he's flicking on the shots, but I think most importantly the fundies, we always talk about the fundamentals, but sometimes it comes down to just shooting too. And I think they're training even perfectly. And Hayes also stepped up to the plate in terms of how much he could bring outside of the IGL role. He's fragging out for this team here, Tanner.
Yeah, Hayes, like I was going to say that about like the EG kind of, not that he drug the team across the finish line, but he really was leading by example. I think there is a little bit of awkwardness when we talk about the 100 Thieves bind, where he's playing the Brimstone and then they run it against EG, and he's feeling a bit more comfortable on the Astra in that matchup, and he does really well. And I'm happy to see teams start to wrap this Astra back into kind of the meta, because as I said before, she was nerfed a little bit to where teams didn't want to play her at all. Now teams are still finding ways to kind of work her in. I think there is a bit of a weakness, because the Astra now feels that it plays a bit more as a site anchor, and on the Ascent, they're running the Astra and keeping the chamber instead of, what we're seeing for most teams, playing that Killjoy still and finding ways to have a more strict anchor for the squad. So I think there's still some weaknesses there, but Hayes has been around the block. Maybe he felt a little too close to home on the Brimstone, couple of boomers playing together, and he had to mix it up. But yeah, this team, NRG, in stage 1 to stage 2 to now, it's like they've been the best team without being the best team, right? Like looking back at their stage 1, I think they were 1-4 or 0-5, but it's like, you guys look so damn good, but you just keep losing, and you just can't get over that finish line. So yeah, dark horse for sure.
I think, you know, what I wonder with NRG is, you know, yes, they're an impressive team and they could make a pretty decent lower bracket run, especially with what we were talking about, Cloud9 just seeming to have a missing piece. Like, it's entirely possible that they could beat Cloud9. But my question is like, let's say they do this lower bracket run, they get to the grand finals, and they're facing FaZe Clan, who are the team that eliminated them from stage 2 of challenges, when people also at the same people for then were like, oh, you know, NRG, they could like make it the whole way. Do you see them beating FaZe Clan? Because I don't. That's the problem. Is it's like, it's not that I don't think they're a good team, it's that I just personally don't see the outcome being that NRG are going to walk away with the win for LCQ.
Yeah, I think on paper, when it comes down to what could be improved for a team like Energy, as we're talking about in the chat with Jovi and Costa, by the way, is like maybe a little bit better utility usage from Energy could definitely prove for them to be a dark horse in the server. But on the other end, even for me, it's the same thing for FaZe Clan. If they work on a little bit better utility, they could be unstoppable going into the LCQ2. And it's a lot of like that brute force W gaming from Baby Bay and from Dicey with the chamber. And now on paper, head to head, you have Dicey versus Tex. Tex actually has been having a pretty decent playoff performance versus a lower playoff performance that we saw during stage 2. And of course, little mistakes like this when you're trying to time the spike and try to get the defuse. But I think at that point, you might not have enough time there for Hayes for the defuse. But again, on paper, when you're looking at these fraggers head to head from role to role, I think it's actually still pretty even. And I want to bring it to that question, actually, because we just saw the bracket and it starts again this Thursday. So the final thoughts, the teams that we actually thought was going to make it into the end, are they still going to make it into your eyes? So I'm going to go around as we have new guests coming on here as to, with the remaining teams, who do you think is going to win the LCQ now, starting from left to right? I'll start with you here, Gio.
I think right now would probably put it at FaZe Clan. I think that the Guard have been really impressive, but when, I don't know, I kind of look at the ways they've won, and I don't know, it could be either. I think it will be one of the two upper bracket teams. I don't think it's going to be a lower bracket team, but I would probably put my money on FaZe Clan right now.
All right, Tanner?
So somebody in chat called me out. It was okay, Bebo or Beb Overwatch, as we like to toss around, said that I'm not giving enough credit to Sentinels, and maybe I'm not. So with that, you know what? I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to say Sentinels look just as strong as any other team should look. Sure, we'll just throw that on the table. So with that, the Guard are winning champions. The Guard are beating FaZe, and the Guard are winning champions. I believe in Trent supremacy. I believe in Valen. I believe in the whole squad. Even if that Jet pick looked a little crazy on the fracture, I'm a believer in it. And I do think that this is the Guard of old. And guess what? They've already got the international experience, so they're going to go back and they're going to wipe the floor. I Guard, LCQ for sure, and then champions in the future.
Andersin?
I think whoever wins the upper bracket, like final, the upper final, is going to be the one who makes it to LCQ. And my reasoning for that is, if the Guard is able to topple FaZe, they're going to not only have the confidence that they deserve to be there, but then that's going to get them to rally to that's going to get them the advantage of being in the upper bracket. They're going to get to watch all of the games that the other teams are playing and then pick out the tendencies and be able to top that. If FaZe is able to take down the Guard, I think, is going to have a harder time beating them again, because FaZe, again, is the team that if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. So when you're playing against them, if the Guard's trying to abuse their tendencies, FaZe Clan will just swap up those tendencies on the moment and then kind of reverse your own plan against them. I think the lower bracket runs are going to be cool to see who gets there, but I don't think the teams in the lower bracket are going to have the same consistency as well as in-depth game plan. The only one that's going to be close when it comes to having a really in-depth game plan is 100 Thieves. But I would say I'm going to have to go with FaZe Clan.
Ooh, okay. And also, don't forget here, chat, that whoever wins the upper bracket final matches has the opportunity of having 2 ban picks, right? If you're going into a BO5. So if you're following that formula, then you have definitely a stronger map pool to play against your opponents. But I think that's why, I know that's why this is going to be Energy being able to win back into the lower brackets, because we've only seen Energy play 3 maps so far, Icebox being one of them and being very strong on that one. But we haven't seen them play Breeze. We haven't seen them play Haven, where the long range corridors and the open map actually benefits players like Som, benefits players like Tex. So it doesn't really matter what map they're going to have to play against the Guard or FaZe into the grand finals. Energy are going to champions here. So with that, we're going to have to figure out what's going to happen once the action starts here on Thursday. And there's going to be some action pack going on into that one. So Andersin, I want to say, thanks so much, man, for your time to come in and hang out with us today and give us your insights on, your path to pro and how you currently see the ecosystem of Valorant outside of the partnership program. I want you to take the time, and I was gonna do like almost a hot ones, like this camera. Tell us what you got going on for you here, Andersin.
Well, no, I just want to say once again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to kind of share a little bit about my insights on the tier 2 scene and champs and all of that. And I don't know what in store the future exactly has, but I'm going to be very excited to showcase what NA has been working on for the past couple of weeks and the leading weeks into the 50K LAN in Philadelphia. And then from there on out, again, it's going to be a journey, but I'm happy to be on that bandwagon.
Hell yeah. Super happy for NSG to continue to provide some tier 2 tournaments or even just tournaments outside of the VCTs to support the ecosystem. Whereas, for example, we're still waiting for the announcements coming out from Riot when this calendar is going to happen outside of the VCTs for the Reignition series. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. But that's gonna end it for today. Tanner, Gio, Andersin, thank you so much for hanging out with us here for another episode of Valoranting. Big shout out once again for Twitch and also to Juke.gg. Make sure you follow us on socials at Valoranting and also on YouTube. And we also have the recording that's going to be able to be rewatched on YouTube, as well as our listening audience on Spotify and on Apple Music. So thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next week for another episode of Valoranting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday. Peace!